I was 29 this summer. I agreed to house sit for my aunt in Silver Lake Village when I realized a person could match your movements so precisely it felt like they were studying your bones. I didn't understand it at first. That first afternoon, stepping out of my Subaru into a neighborhood where people still waved at strangers, nothing felt dangerous. The air smelled like warm sap and pavement cooling after a long day. Across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Gable were watering their garden, the hose arcing like a soft ribbon in the sun. Whispering Pines had always been the kind of place where people iron their jeans and bring homemade bread to new neighbors. A place where you assume safety. I had come there to clear my head after a breakup that left me hollow and restless. My aunt's craftsman house felt cozy and quiet. Wood floors, tall windows, a porch that creaked in a familiar way. I spent my first 2 days exactly how I'd planned. Jogging, cooking simple meals, convincing myself I was healing. On August 14th, around 6:42 p.m., I set out for a run on Trestle Ridge Nature Trail, a path I'd used since high school. The light was turning that soft orange that makes everything look harmless. About a mile in, I spotted him. He was standing in the middle of the trail, not walking, not stretching, just standing, tall, stiff, facing the trees. There was something off about his posture, as if he'd been posed there and left to idle. I tried to look casual as I ran past him, eyes fixed ahead, but the moment I passed, he turned his head. Not fast, slow, deliberate, like he was tracking me. A chill rolled straight through my ribs. I told myself he was just a hiker. Maybe odd, maybe distracted. Nothing more. But half a mile later, when I stopped to tie my shoe, I heard footsteps behind me. Steady, measured. When I paused, they paused. When I shifted my weight, gravel crunched behind me with the same timing. My stomach dropped. I didn't check who it was. I didn't want to see confirmation. Instead, I straightened, forced myself into a slow jog, and the footsteps resumed instantly, matching me beat for beat. Same rhythm, same distance, like an echo made of flesh. The moment the trail opened to the road, I sprinted. By the time I reached my aunt's porch, my hands were shaking too hard to fit the key in the lock. I shut the door, leaned against it, and tried to breathe through the rising panic. I'd barely calmed down when Mrs. Gable called from across the street. "Olivia? Someone's at your steps." I moved to the blinds, lifted one slat, and saw him, standing at the bottom of the stairs. The same man from the trail. His face was blank, unreadable. His arms hung at his sides. He didn't knock, didn't move. He simply stared at the door like he was waiting for permission. I called the police. 20 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers approached him cautiously. He didn't resist. He just turned toward them and smiled faintly, the expression thin and unsettling. One officer asked, "Sir, what are you doing here?" His answer still curls inside me. "She left the door unlocked in my head." The officers exchanged confused looks. They talked to him quietly for several minutes, then walked him down the driveway. No arrest, no urgency. "Ma'am," one officer told me, "he hasn't committed a crime. Standing on the sidewalk is allowed. He didn't touch your property, and he didn't threaten you." "But he followed me," I insisted. "He was on the trail." "That's a public trail," he said, almost apologetic. "Unless he laid hands on you or tried to enter the home, there's not much we can do." He gave me a card and left me standing in the doorway, feeling foolish and exposed. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The fridge hum, the shifting beams, the wind nudging pine needles against the windows. I kept replaying his footsteps matching mine, the exact timing, the eerie precision. Morning came too quickly. The sun felt accusatory, too bright for the fear that hadn't faded. I tried to convince myself I'd overreacted. When I finally went outside to grab the mail, I saw a mark on the side of the mailbox. A circle drawn in white chalk. A perfect ring. Fresh. It wasn't there yesterday. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to rationalize it. Kids drawing. A prank. Anything. But the way it was placed, exactly at eye level, felt intentional. I spent that day inside, curtains half closed. I tried distraction, cleaned the kitchen, reorganized drawers, made soup I didn't eat. I kept checking the window every few minutes, expecting to see him again. At 3 p.m, something tapped the living room window. I froze, heart thudding. I forced myself to look. A pine cone had fallen against the glass. Just a pine cone. I laughed under my breath, embarrassed at my own nerves. As daylight dipped toward evening, the porch motion light flicked on. I crept to the window and saw nothing. No cats, no branches, just the empty porch. The light snapped off, then came back on again 20 minutes later. Still nothing. I told myself I was imagining patterns. Trauma does that. It teaches you to brace. Just after sunset, I considered calling a friend, but the last thing I wanted was to sound paranoid. So I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling my phone. The house settled around me with small familiar creaks. Then I heard it. A sound from the porch. Not loud, but distinct. A soft pressure on wood. A shift of weight. Footsteps, carefully placed. I stood slowly, barely breathing. When I stepped forward, the porch creaked again, matching the timing of my step, like an echo outside. I tried to tell myself it was a raccoon, maybe a deer wandering close, something normal. But raccoons don't mimic footsteps. I stayed awake until dawn. My nerves were so frayed my hands trembled even when I was still. On the third morning, I stepped outside to get the newspaper. And there it was. A new chalk drawing below the circle. A stick figure shape inside it. Me. My stomach knotted. I glanced around the quiet street. Everything looked normal in that unnerving small-town way. Nothing out of place. No people. No movement. But someone had stood close enough to the house at night to draw me inside a chalk circle. And it meant something I didn't want to understand. He wasn't just following. He was claiming. I called the police again. This time, a young officer named Caleb showed up, a guy who looked like he still lived on energy drinks and optimism. He examined the chalk drawings with an expression that fell somewhere between concern and annoyance. "Could be kids," he said. "It wasn't here yesterday. Kids come out late sometimes. TikTok dares, graffiti challenges." "This isn't graffiti." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, here's the reality. A guy standing on the sidewalk isn't a crime. Chalk isn't vandalism. You can wash it off with a hose. Unless you have a video of him trespassing or he makes a specific threat, he's allowed to be here. This is a public street. So I just wait until something happens?" He softened a little. "I'm not saying that. Just be cautious. Keep the doors locked. Don't run alone for a while. If he comes back, call us again." It was every woman's nightmare disguised as protocol. When he left, the house felt smaller than it had the day before. The windows felt thinner. That afternoon, I tried to reclaim some normalcy. I called my friend Jenna and invited her over, but she said she couldn't get away from work. I almost told her everything, then chickened out and said I was just bored. I even called my ex, out of old habit, but hung up before the second ring. I didn't want comfort from someone who'd already let me down. For a few hours, nothing happened. The sun hung heavy and gold over the neighborhood. Kids played basketball down the street. A couple walked their dog. The ordinary rhythm calmed me enough that I began to think maybe it really had been a one-off encounter, someone with mental health issues wandering through. By early evening, I almost felt silly for being so scared. I made pasta and opened a beer I didn't finish. For the first time since the trail, I let my guard down. Then, around 8, I went out to water the plants on the porch. As I knelt by the railing, I noticed something under the floorboards. A corner of fabric peeking out between the planks. I pulled it gently. A sleeping bag. thin, dirty, and warm. Someone had been sleeping directly beneath me. My legs nearly gave out. I stumbled inside, locked the door, and slid down to the floor. My breath came fast and shallow, the edges of my vision going tight. I sat like that for a long time, holding myself still, trying not to dissolve into panic. When I finally stood, the sky outside had deepened into a dim purplish blue, and that was when I heard it. A cough from outside. Not a random cough. My cough. I had just coughed into my sleeve while crying, and the sound outside repeated it. Same pitch, same rhythm. My body went cold. A moment later, another sound. A soft thump on the porch roof, right above the path I'd taken through the house. Matching. He was listening for my steps, and mirroring them. I grabbed the phone and called the police again. They promised to send someone when available, which I knew meant I was low priority. The porch light flicked on, then off, then on again. He was moving around the house. I kept all the lights off, crouched behind the couch, and waited. Every now and then, the porch boards creaked in sync with my small movements, as if he were mirroring my position outside. Then, a whisper through the window pane, so soft I almost doubted it. "You're getting better at hiding." I froze, muscles locking up. I didn't make a sound. Hours passed. Eventually the noises faded. Exhaustion dragged me into a half-sleep on the living room floor. When dawn finally arrived, I stood and checked the porch cautiously. 3 new chalk marks decorated the siding next to the door. A circle, a stick figure inside, and now a large X slashed through it. No escape. I knew I had to leave. I packed quickly, just clothes and my wallet and my aunt's spare key. When I ran to the car and turned the ignition, nothing happened. Not even a click. I popped the hood. The battery cables had been neatly severed. Footsteps crunched behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. A shadow stretched across the driveway, long and certain. I bolted toward the house. The gravel shifted behind me, his pace matching mine perfectly. I reached the door, punched in the keypad code, and stumbled inside. As soon as it closed, the keypad beeped again. Beep, beep, beep. He was entering the same code. Perfect timing, perfect mimicry. He had learned it from listening. The door clicked open. He stepped inside. I grabbed the first thing I could, a ceramic lamp on the console table, and swung it as he entered the hallway. It hit his shoulder, hard enough to stagger him. I darted past him, sprinting barefoot across the yard toward the Gables' front porch. I pounded on their door, screaming, until lights flicked on inside. When Mr. Gable opened the door, I collapsed into the foyer, gasping. By the time the police searched my aunt's property, the man was gone. No footprints. He'd known exactly where to step on the stones. No chalk. Rain had washed it off. No sleeping bag. It had vanished. They filed a report. Promised patrols. Told me to stay with family. I left Whispering Pines that afternoon. It's been 3 months. I moved apartments, changed my number, started therapy. Most days I walk to work and try to pretend the world belongs to people, not shadows. But sometimes, when I walk down a quiet street, I hear an extra set of footsteps fall into rhythm with mine. Perfect rhythm. And when I stop, they stop. I was 31 the night I realized a house can listen to you, breathe with you, and quietly decide which of your fears to bring to life. That thought didn't come to me until much later, long after Lancaster County's October cold had crept into my bones, long after the last porch light had flickered out on Willow Creek Road, long after Milo's soft whimper made the hair on my arms rise. But even at the start, even as I pulled into my boss's gravel driveway, something in the air felt aware, alert, as if the old farmhouse had been waiting for someone like me, tired, distracted, hopeful in the stupid way only desperate people can be. I told myself I needed the quiet. That grading 72 essays about the crucible would go faster away from my cluttered apartment. That the distance from my ex's constant apologies would help me think. That being alone with my thoughts wasn't a threat yet. But the moment I stepped inside, the house greeted me with a sigh, an exhale of warm, stale air, like it had been holding its breath for years. Milo, their aging golden retriever, nudged my leg as if checking who I was trying to be tonight. "It's just us, buddy," I whispered. Rain ticked against the windows. The smell of old cedar and lemon polish clung to everything. In the kitchen, a single under-cabinet light glowed faintly, as if someone had left it on to keep the dark from getting bold. I kept telling myself this would be good for me. Healing, productive. But unease doesn't need evidence to exist. It only needs silence. By midnight, silence was all I had. The kind that makes every house noise sound personal. The refrigerator hum deepened until it felt like a low growl. Floorboards shifted like someone trying not to wake a sleeping partner. Milo's breathing filled the living room in steady, soft waves. I had just finished grading an essay so incoherent, I wondered if the student was messing with me when it happened. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. Milo lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. The knocks came again, measured, patient, as if the person on the other side wasn't in a hurry because he already knew we were inside. When I opened the door just a crack, rain misted my face. A man stood on the porch wearing a sewer inspection uniform, though nothing about him felt municipal. His posture was too stiff, his eyes too alert. The logo on his chest read, Township Infrastructure Division, while the patch on his sleeve said County Utilities Service. Not matching, not standard, not right. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "Routine midnight check for sewer backflow. Township orders." "Midnight?" My voice cracked. "Nobody told me anything." "They wouldn't have," he replied gently. "Paperwork's behind as usual." Something in me recoiled. A tiny, electric instinct. A quiet no. "That's okay," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Everything seems fine here." He nodded slowly, as if disappointed, but not surprised. Then he tilted his head, eyes flicking past me. "Is Milo inside? Could spook him if I have to check the crawl space." My blood iced over. I hadn't said the dog's name. I shut the door, carefully, not slamming, and locked every bolt like I was defusing a bomb. My hands shook. Milo whined softly, staring toward the back hallway. The house had grown still, listening with us. I called my friend Courtney. "Hey, weird question. Township sewer inspectors. They don't... Jen, they don't come at night. Ever." Her voice was sharp, awake now. "Don't open anything. Don't talk to him. Did he see inside?" A soft click came from the back of the house. Then the alarm chimed a single warning tone, cut off abruptly, like someone had pressed a finger to its throat. "Court," I whispered. "He's not at the front door anymore." Milo's growl vibrated low and steady, pointing toward the laundry room. The air felt cold, metallic. The farmhouse, so warm moments ago, now felt like a lung holding stale breath. "Get somewhere you can lock," Courtney said. "Right now." I ran upstairs, heart slamming painfully. The house groaned beneath me, floorboards shifting, wood contracting. But one sound didn't belong. A faint scrape on tile, rhythmic, controlled. Footsteps. Someone was moving through the house with the confidence of familiarity. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom. The tiny window above the tub framed the dark fields beyond, wind rattling the loose shutter. My phone screen glowed pale against the dark. "Stay on the line," Courtney began, But the line crackled, then cut. Dead. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone else. Wide eyes, lips trembling, face washed in sickly blue-white from the hallway nightlight outside. Something shifted on the landing. A slow step, then another. The doorknob twitched. Not a twist, just a test. A patient one. I pressed both hands over my mouth. Milo barked, loud, furious, closer now, and something heavy slammed against a wall downstairs. The intruder moved quickly then, his footsteps no longer cautious but purposeful. Then silence. Nothing but my pulse pounding in my skull. Minutes blurred, maybe hours. Then sirens cut through the night, distant but growing closer. Shoes slapped against the tile below. The back door creaked open as if released, not forced. By the time officers swept the house, the intruder was gone, leaving behind only a violated quiet and the faint smell of cold earth. They found lockpicks scoring inside the back door mechanism. Tiny, precise, deliberate. "This wasn't random," one officer said. "Someone's been posing as a worker, scouting homes all week." His words should have comforted me. They didn't. Because one detail clung to me like wet cloth. The intruder had known Milo's name without hearing it. He'd spoken it casually, like someone who'd practiced, like someone who'd been listening. I stayed at Courtney's that night, but sleeping somewhere else doesn't save you from replaying the moment the doorknob twitched, or the soft click of a system being shut off, or the way Milo's growl shifted from warning to fear. Courtney's apartment was warm, safe, urban. Cars hummed on the street below. But at 3:17 a.m., I woke to the faintest sound, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on her hallway wall. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound didn't repeat. The building settled. A neighbor flushed a toilet upstairs. I told myself it was nothing, but my brain replayed his mismatched patches, the way he looked past me into the house, searching for something familiar, or someone. When morning came, I gathered my things, though I wasn't sure what good things were anymore. Familiar objects don't protect you from unfamiliar intentions. For days afterward, I felt watched, in parking lots, in grocery aisles, in reflections. Every utility vehicle looked suspicious. I Googled township uniforms obsessively, cross-referencing patches. Nothing matched what he wore, because it wasn't supposed to match. One night, a week later, I woke to Milo barking. Not the distant memory of it, but the sound itself, sharp and real. But Milo wasn't with me. He was miles away at my boss's house. I sat up so fast I felt dizzy. My bedroom was dark, silent, except for my own ragged breathing. You imagined it. But the next morning, when I opened my front door to leave for work, something sat neatly on my doormat. A single utility patch. County Utilities Serve. I stared at it, cold spreading beneath my skin like ink. The fabric was slightly damp, edges frayed, as if it had been torn off in a hurry, or left behind intentionally. I wanted to call someone, anyone. But what would I say? That a man who already broke into a house once had decided to leave breadcrumbs? That he'd somehow followed me home despite police, despite crowds, despite logic? I picked up the patch with trembling fingers and noticed something on the back. Something faint but unmistakably deliberate. A smear of dirt, dark, wet, metallic smelling, the same cold smell that lingered in the farmhouse. I dropped it, heart hammering. That night I barricaded my door with the heaviest furniture I owned. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every passing car made my pulse spike. I slept in short, jagged breaths. At 1:42 a.m., my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Is Milo with you tonight?" My stomach plummeted. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone. 5 minutes later, another vibration, this time from the apartment intercom. Someone pressed the call button 3 times. Slow, deliberate. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, too afraid to breathe. The intercom crackled. A soft exhale drifted through the speaker. Then a low voice, too calm, too familiar. "You shouldn't have left the house so quickly, Jennifer." I pressed my hands over my ears. "You left something behind." His voice hummed, static-wrapped. "I'll bring it next time." Next time. The phrase lingered, thick with promise. The intercom clicked off. Silence filled the apartment, heavy and unbroken, the kind of silence that feels like an inhale waiting to become a presence. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I didn't dare look out the peephole. And somewhere in the city, maybe a block away, maybe across the street, maybe already inside someone else's walls, a uniform hangs in a dark closet, almost right, almost official, almost real, waiting for the next door to open. The second I turned the lock, everything in that house changed. Maybe it had already changed before I arrived. Maybe the house had been waiting. But that was the moment I felt the air shift, the way pressure drops before a storm you can feel in your teeth. My name is Daniela, though everyone except my grandmother calls me Danny, and the night I agreed to house-sit my cousin Rebecca's old colonial on 118 Harper Lane was the night I learned what silence sounds like when it wants to hurt you. I should have said no. I should have made any excuse. But Rebecca had this way of making her favor sound tiny, harmless. Just a weekend, Danny, 2 nights tops. And I'd been the kind of cousin who always wanted to be dependable. Besides, I'd just ended a draining situationship and told myself some quiet would be good for my brain. That was my first mistake, thinking the house offered quiet. It offered something else entirely. I got there around sunset on March 2nd, the cold already crawling out of the coastline, the sky bruised purple. The colonial looked like something out of a childhood memory. White siding, black shutters, pitched roof. But up close, the details betrayed its age. The windows wobbled in their frames. The porch boards bowed under my boots. The front door stuck, like the house hesitated before letting me in. Inside, the smell hit immediately. Old wood soaked in old rain, layered with the faded sweetness of lavender cleaner Rebecca favored. It was comforting for exactly 4 seconds. Then the air felt dense, like the house had lungs, and I'd walked into its exhale. I set my bag upstairs, texted Rebecca a quick, "Here safe," then wandered through the house turning on lights. The bulbs took a couple seconds to warm, flickering before steadying. In the kitchen, I tapped the radiator with my knuckle. Lukewarm. The house had that winter dampness that seeps into your sleeves. I turned up the thermostat, listened to the distant clank of pipes awakening, and told myself everything was normal. I kept telling myself that for hours. By 11:38 p.m., I'd settled into the guest bedroom Rebecca told me to use, the one across from her office, when the first heavy shift sounded from downstairs. Not a creak or groan, not the settling of wood, something deliberately shifting weight. I muted my podcast and sat completely still. The sound came again, slow, dragging, like someone sliding something across the floor. My throat tightened. Maybe something fell? A loose box? But the pace didn't sound like an object falling. It sounded like footsteps that didn't want to be mistaken for footsteps. I grabbed the small flashlight from my bag and went downstairs, every step feeling like it echoed too loudly. The living room looked untouched, throw blanket folded, books in a neat stack. I checked the locks, front door secure, side door bolted, back door chained. I pressed down on each window latch. Solid. My breath fogged faintly in the cold as I stepped toward the basement door. It was closed. Perfectly normal. Perfectly still. I called out, "Hello?" My voice felt embarrassingly small. Silence answered. The kind that makes you wish you hadn't spoken because now something knows you're there. I didn't open the basement door. I can admit that with no shame. We like to imagine we'd be bold, that logic would win over fear. But standing there, with the smell of cold concrete drifting faintly from the cracks around that door, everything in me said, "Don't." So I backed away, heart thudding too fast, pretending nothing was wrong. But something moved upstairs as soon as I reached the last step. A shape, a shadow sliding past the hallway wall. Not fast, not darting. It moved like it had all the time in the world. I froze mid-step, the air tightening around my ribs. The shadow slipped into Rebecca's guest room across from mine. That door had been wide open all evening. Now it was slightly ajar. I whispered, not sure to who, "No, no, no, no." I didn't go to the guest room. I turned into my bedroom instead, because denial is powerful, and survival sometimes means choosing the smaller doorway. I stepped inside, shut the door quietly, and twisted the lock. The lock clicked, and in the same breath, the doorknob turned from the other side. Not yanked, not slammed, tested, like fingers closing around it slowly, checking if I was careless enough to leave it open. Metal whispered against metal. My lungs locked. Then I heard the breathing. Thick, wet, too close. Breathing like someone whose nose is partly blocked, whose mouth is slightly open, breathing inches from the wood. I backed away until my calves hit the bed frame. "Rebecca," I whispered into the cold air, as if her name could shield me. The first slam hit the door hard enough to rattle the dresser. A picture frame on the wall crashed to the floor. I clamped a hand over my mouth, the instinctive kind of silence that feels like prayer. The second slam hit harder. I felt the door flex under the impact. I braced my back against it, both hands gripping the handle as the intruder threw their full weight into it again and again. The wood groaned. The screws strained. My arms shook. I don't remember dialing 911. My fingers acted before my mind caught up. The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat the address because I was breathing too fast. I pressed my shoulder harder into the door, whispering, "He's trying to get in. He's trying to get in. Please hurry." Somewhere downstairs, the wind howled. Somewhere closer, a man panted like an animal, inches from me. The sirens arrived like a blade through the night. The slamming stopped so abruptly, I felt the absence before the quiet. I didn't move until I heard officers shouting through the house, boots thundering up the stairs. When they opened my door, I collapsed onto the floor, shaking so hard my teeth ached. I kept saying, "He was right there. He was right there." They searched room by room, clearing closets, corners, behind furniture. The house looked untouched, but then Officer Klein called out from the basement. His voice shook. "Found him. Crawl space. Alive." They pulled out a man thin, filthy, shaking, clothes matted with dirt, nails blackened. His eyes were hollow in a way I hope never to see again. He wouldn't look at any of us. He just kept staring at the floor like a child caught doing something he couldn't explain. One officer checked the guest room, the one where the shadow had slipped earlier. When he came out, his face looked drained of color. He held something wrapped in a towel. "Daniela, you should see this." Laid neatly on the bed was a long, rusted crowbar. Not tossed, placed, waiting. The towel beneath it was folded like someone preparing a tool for work. When they took me outside for fresh air, I finally let my legs give out. The world tilted in slow waves. The officer tried reassuring me, telling me I was safe now, but his voice sounded far away, swallowed by the roar of my own pulse. I knew, down to the marrow of everything I am, that safety had nothing to do with it. Something had been planned. Something had almost happened. And then, in the months that followed, the real unraveling began. I moved back into my apartment, but the night never let me go. I'd lie awake, listening to the building settle, and every click of the radiator sounded like a turning doorknob. Every soft shuffle above me felt like weight shifting where it shouldn't. My brain learned new tricks, imagining footsteps, replaying slams, manufacturing breaths in the dark. Therapy helped, a little. Friends tried, but empathy has limits when the terror is yours alone. The police said the man was a drifter, possibly mentally unwell, maybe living down there for days before I arrived. They said he had tools for picking locks, small rations, a blanket shoved deep into the crawl space. They found scratches on the inside of the office closet door, like someone had practiced sliding bolts, silently. They said the crowbar was likely intended for leverage. They gave me information. Information is not closure. Rebecca couldn't bring herself to sleep in her own house for weeks. She kept apologizing like she'd handed me a grenade. But none of this was her fault. Houses don't warn you when someone crawls inside their bones. 3 weeks ago, this is the part I haven't told anyone yet, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to a sound on my apartment door. Not loud, not violent, just gentle. A slow testing of the knob. Metal, brushing metal. I sat up so fast my spine cracked, heart slamming into my throat. I whispered, "No, no, not again." But when I ran to the peephole, the hallway was empty, silent. And still, I know what I heard. Sometimes at night, when the building groans or a neighbor walks past too slowly, I remember the exact moment I twisted the lock at Rebecca's house. Because if I had hesitated 1 single second, I wouldn't be here writing this. And the part that keeps me awake, the part I can't exhale or rationalize, is this. Locks don't stop shadows. And shadows don't forget the people who get away. The storm woke me the second the metal began to clank, sharp, rhythmic, purposeful, like someone tapping a message against the world just to see who listened. I wasn't fully conscious yet. I felt my mind swim up from whatever thin dream I'd been clinging to, only to be met with that awful clank, 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 echoing across Mrs. Higgins's farmhouse like a pry bar hitting a bone. For a moment, I thought the sound came from inside the room, something scraping the radiator or rubbing along the floorboards. But then lightning cracked across the window and framed my reflection in a wash of white. My own face looked startled, sleep-creased, and unsure. I pushed myself upright, the quilts heavy on my legs, the air damp with storm sweat and old wood. It was 2:14 a.m. I remember that because the red digital clock bled the numbers like an accusation. Too late to be awake. Too late for anyone else to be outside. I listened. The house held its breath. Then it came again, metal dragging against something hard, distant but unmistakably close. I crossed to the window slowly, every floorboard groaning like it didn't want to be involved. When I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, rain streaked down in frantic diagonals. The security light flickered once, bathed the yard in a trembling yellow, and revealed nothing but wet grass, the sagging fence, and the dark outline of the tool shed. I squinted, my breath fogging the pain. Then the next flash of lightning hit, and there he was. A man, not running, not seeking shelter, just standing there motionless, shoulders straight, head slightly tilted, watching me, as if he'd been waiting for the moment the sky lit up so he could be seen. My stomach dropped hard, like I'd stepped backward into nothing. This wasn't a neighbor. Mrs. Higgins had told me repeatedly how no one ever comes through Cold Creek unless they're lost. And he wasn't acting lost. He didn't even flinch when the wind shoved him. It pushed rain sideways across his coat, but he stayed rigid, staring at the farmhouse with the patience of a man who didn't need warmth or light. I whispered, "Nope, no, we are not doing this." My voice sounded too small in the darkness. I grabbed my phone and texted Mrs. Higgins. "There's someone outside, standing near the shed. Is anyone supposed to be here?" The bubble didn't even attempt to send, spinning uselessly before fading. Cell service was always hit or miss out here. Tonight, it felt like the hills themselves wanted me cut off. Thunder shook the house. The security light died entirely. When the yard fell back into blackness, something in me panicked like the visibility, even for a second, had been the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I backed away from the window, my heartbeat rising so tense and high it felt like a second pulse in my throat. Downstairs, the old barn dog Milo whimpered from his bed near the laundry room. Not a growl, not a bark, a whimper. He'd lived on this property for 10 years. He knew its rhythms, its noises, the way storms swelled across the valley. And yet, he whimpered. My fingers dug into the stair rail as I descended. The air felt thicker the closer I got to the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator flickered like nerves misfiring. The whole house felt wrong, as if it had shifted by a few imperceptible degrees while I slept. I reached the bottom step and froze. The tapping had begun. Tap, tap, tap. Not knuckles. Something harder. A metal ring or tool. The sound came from the kitchen window. Every cell in my body reacted before my mind could catch up, tightening, bracing, pleading for me to stay hidden. But dread is a strange motivator. It pulls you forward, even as every instinct tells you to retreat. I forced my feet to move, one careful step at a time, sliding across the wood floor, trying not to breathe. The blinds over the window shifted faintly, not from the wind, from him, pressing or dragging something against the glass. When I reached the end of the counter, another flash of lightning tore through the sky, and I saw his face. Soaked hair plastered to his skull, eyes dull and unblinking, rain streaks carving lines across his cheeks. He held something, a crowbar, angled upward, scraping the window in a long metallic whine that felt like it dragged across my teeth. He didn't look angry. He didn't look rushed. He looked professional, like someone who had a task to complete, a routine to follow, and absolutely no emotional investment in who was inside. My voice croaked out, "What do you want?" even though the glass swallowed the sound. He didn't move, not even the crowbar tip. Thunder rolled again, and in that rumble my mind filled with every scenario I tried to shove away. That he'd cut the power, that he'd break the lock, that he'd walk through this house like a man punching a time card. The front door handle jiggled. Once. Twice. Not desperate, not banging, just evaluating. Okay. My breath quickened. Think, Sam, think. But panic had its hands around my throat, and every thought dissolved into noise. I grabbed the car keys from the bowl by the door. My fingers brushed the cold metal and found a small dent, one I didn't remember. That should have meant nothing. But my mind flashed back to the metallic clanking that woke me. I ran for the mudroom, Milo scrambling after me. I shoved open the door, the wind slamming rain into my face so violently it felt like gravel. I sprinted across the porch toward the car parked 10 feet away, my socks soaking instantly through the boards. Behind me, the front door handle jiggled again, calmer than before. I jammed the key into the car door, flung it open, and dove inside, Milo scrambling in after me, trembling so badly his tags rattled. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. Relief hit me for half a second, until the dashboard lit up with warnings. Left tail light out, license plate error, electrical fault, trunk ajar. What? I whispered. Another lightning strike illuminated the back of the car. I twisted around and saw the trunk slightly open, just enough that the latch hadn't caught. My breath stuttered. Someone had been there, not minutes ago, hours, maybe before I even went to sleep. He'd been doing something to the car, something patient, precise, something he didn't need to finish to make sure I'd notice it eventually. I slammed the gas and tore down the dirt road, mud slashing up across the windshield. Milo whined, paws digging into the seat. I gripped the wheel, eyes darting between the road and the mirrors. Halfway down the drive, I made the mistake of looking in the side mirror. He stood there, at the edge of the porch, rain pouring off him like he was carved from stone. He raised one hand and waved slow, measured, almost bored. Not mocking me personally, mocking the entire idea that running could ever matter. It wasn't the wave of a man who'd lost something. It was the wave of someone who had simply timed the process wrong, and knew he'd get another chance. The sheriff's station sat 10 miles down Highway 22, a squat brick building that looked more like an abandoned post office than a place for safety. I parked crooked, practically fell out of the car, and stumbled inside, dripping and shaking, Milo at my heels. The deputy at the desk, a tired woman in her 50s with a thermos of coffee and the stiff posture of someone who'd seen too many bad nights, looked up. "Ma'am, you okay?" "No," I said, my voice splitting. Someone was at the house, the one on Cold Creek Road. He was trying to get in. I think he messed with my car. I don't know. She set her coffee down slowly. "Sit down. Start from the beginning." I tried, but the words came out tangled, soaked in adrenaline. The storm, the tapping, the crowbar, the car, the wave. She wrote it all down, but her expression didn't change until I reached the part about the car tampering. "That part we can check," she said. "If someone was messing with it, we'll know." She stepped outside with a flashlight, circling my car while I sat in the lobby trying not to unravel. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped against glass, too bright, too harsh. Milo paced, whining every time thunder cracked outside. When she came back, her face looked drained. "Your license plate has been removed. Wires underneath were cut, then taped back together. Whoever did this wanted your car to function just enough to move, but compromised." "What does that mean?" I whispered. "That he wasn't trying to keep you from leaving," she said quietly. "He was trying to control how you left, when, and if something went wrong on the road, it wouldn't have looked like an attack." My throat dried. Why would someone do that? She hesitated. "People who plan." Her words sank in like cold water. For the next hour, more officers arrived, inspected the car again, and made notes. The storm kept pounding the building. At some point, someone made me tea, though I barely tasted it. They asked if I'd seen the man before. No. Had I argued with anyone recently? No. Had I noticed signs of surveillance? Strange cars? Unfamiliar faces? No. 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 Around dawn, the storm finally broke into a pale, washed-out morning. They escorted me back to the farmhouse carefully, slowly, like moving someone through a crime scene that hadn't yet been named. My legs shook when I stepped onto the porch, expecting to see gouges in the wood or muddy prints or claw marks. But there was nothing. No footprints in the soft earth. No tool marks on the window. No sign of forced entry. It was as if the storm had cleaned the world of him. The deputy walked the perimeter anyway, checking every hinge, every latch. She paused at the window where I'd first seen him. "Are you sure he was dragging a crowbar here?" "Well, yes," I whispered. "I saw it hit the glass." She nodded slowly. "Storm probably washed the marks off. We'll dust inside anyway." While they worked, I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug I wasn't drinking from. The house smelled like wet dog, old coffee, and the faint mineral scent storms leave behind. But underneath that was something else, something metallic, faint, unsettling, like a coin pressed against skin. Hours passed. They found no trace. The official report said, "Suspicious individual, no identity, no evidence, no pursuit possible." The deputy drove me to a motel off the main highway and told me to stay with family if possible. I nodded, thanked her, tried to seem stable. But inside, I felt hollowed out, like he'd reached inside me without touching me and carved out whatever part of me believed I was ever truly alone. That night in the motel, every sound made me flinch. Doors closing, feet in the hall, ice machine clicking on. I paced for hours, Milo barely sleeping. When I finally collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion dragged me under, but not deeply. Somewhere in that shallow, fractured sleep, I heard it again. Clank, clank, clank. I shot upright, heart slamming, breath gone. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The motel didn't have a shed, didn't have metal tools hanging outside. I stumbled to the window anyway, threw back the curtain with shaking hands. The lot outside, was empty. No man. No crowbar. No storm. But on the hood of my car, my patched, tampered with car, sat a single object. Small, rusted, placed with care. A screw. The kind used to fasten a license plate. And beneath it, drawn in the condensation of the windshield, was one word written with a fingertip. Soon. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there, frozen, realizing something deep and terrible. He had never been chasing me. He'd just been letting me get ahead. And professionals always return to the job, left unfinished. I should have trusted the way Jasper froze in that hallway the moment we stepped inside the Miller's cabin, because dogs know when a house already belongs to someone. But on September 3rd, 2024, I was 28, exhausted, behind on freelance deadlines, and telling myself the Olympic Peninsula woods were the cure for everything a month of city noise had made feel wrong. The cabin smelled like cedar and damp pine, that deep forest scent you don't get from any candle. And for a moment, I let myself believe the peace would hold. Jasper, a big shepherd mix with cinnamon brown eyes, trotted beside me, tail high, tapping the wood floors with that comforting rhythm I'd already grown used to. But the second we reached the guest room at the end of the hall, he stopped so abruptly, my bag swung forward and hit his side. His fur lifted along his spine like static through a sweater. "Jasper? What's up, buddy?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the half-open guest room door as if waiting for something inside it to breathe. I nudged him gently. Nothing. His stance said, no, with a certainty I should have listened to. Instead, I laughed it off too loud in the quiet house. Huh, yeah, okay, creepy door. We get it. But even as I said it, a strange stillness pressed against the back of my neck, a heaviness, like the air held a breath, watching us. I kept the guest room shut after that. By evening, the rain rolled in Pacific Northwest rain, the kind that doesn't fall so much as blanket everything. I set up my laptop in the basement office, a little converted space with concrete floors, a hum from the dehumidifier, and barely enough Wi-Fi to load emails. The storm thudded against the cabin roof above me, and the whole place felt cocooned, sealed tight. Safe. That illusion lasted maybe 2 hours. Around 9:17 p.m., I heard it soft at first, like a shifting board. Then again, footsteps. Slow, unhurried, directly above me. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard, listening. A second step, a third. The cadence was unmistakable. Heel, toe, weight. Someone walking in the living room. My first thought, Mrs. Miller forgot someone was coming to pick something up. Or maybe they sent their son? They'd mentioned having a teenage nephew help with yard work sometimes. I grasped at every possible explanation because the alternative made my skin crawl. I pushed my chair back quietly. Jasper lifted his head, ears perked, a soft growl building in his throat. I whispered, "Shh," but my own breath trembled. The footsteps stopped. Silence thickened around us, the hum of the dehumidifier suddenly sounding too loud. I grabbed my phone, the screen lighting my face in that ghostly blue, and typed, "Hey, quick question. Anyone supposed to be here tonight?" I didn't send it yet. Some part of me wanted to check first, prove it was nothing, because messaging homeowners with, "I think someone's in your cabin," felt dramatic. And I hated being dramatic. I stood, stretching my neck to listen again. Nothing. So I went to the basement window, pushing the old frame slightly to look outside. My breath fogged the glass. At first I saw only the dark smear of trees and the rain streaking down. Then I saw the corner of the window frame itself. The wood was splintered, a lower edge pried up, as if forced open from the outside. And a smear, dark brown, muddy, dragged along the sill. My throat tightened. Someone had climbed in. While I was down here, alone, I stumbled back, pulse hammering. Jasper whined, pacing. I forced myself up the basement stairs one step at a time, each creak magnifying the panic spiraling through me. Halfway up, Jasper darted ahead but froze at the landing body, rigid, teeth showing. He faced the hallway. The hallway was dark, except for a faint reflection of the storm light through the far window. I reached blindly for the light switch, flicked it on, and my phone vibrated in my hand. Except, it wasn't my phone. The sound came from upstairs. A faint buzz, followed by a chime, a notification from a device sitting somewhere above us, a soft vibration against wood. I gripped the railing. Jasper growled again, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Hello?" I said. Stupid. Too loud. Too hopeful. "Silence," answered. Then a shadow pooling under the closed guest room door. Long, slow, like someone walking in small circles inside. Just pacing. Comfortable. A cold ripple crawled beneath my skin. I bolted. Jasper followed, nails skittering on the hardwood as I yanked open the front door and stumbled into the rain. The air slapped me with cold, but I didn't stop until we reached the gravel driveway. I turned back just as a door slammed from the rear of the cabin, the back door. He had slipped out the opposite side. Like we were two people simply leaving the same house through different exits. Like it was natural. My hands shook as I called 911, my voice thin, embarrassingly breathy. Police came fast, lights piercing the dark woods. They swept the cabin room by room. No one. But the upstairs bed. The covers were warm, sunken in the shape of a body. And on the nightstand was a ripped protein bar wrapper. My brand. The officer asked if I had eaten it. I hadn't. It wasn't mine. But someone else in that house knew what I ate. Someone had been watching long enough to learn it. Someone had been living there long enough to feel comfortable. And the worst part, the thing I didn't tell police, was that before they arrived, when I stood on the deck, listening to the storm swallow the forest, I could have sworn I heard a whisper inside the walls. A soft, satisfied exhale, as if whoever had been there was relieved. I'd finally left. I didn't sleep that night. The police stayed for an hour, maybe less, leaving me with a vague, "We'll patrol the area," and a list of things to double-check if I chose to stay. As if staying in that cabin was even a remote possibility. I drove back to town with Jasper in the passenger seat, rain smearing the windshield, my heart beat loud in my ears. I checked the rearview mirror every 30 seconds, convinced a face would bloom in the back seat. When I finally reached my apartment, everything felt wrong, like the cabin had followed me. I kept glancing at my bathroom door, half expecting it to ease open on its own. The next morning, Mrs. Miller called. "Sweetie, we got your message. The police said you were spooked." Her tone held a soft laugh under it, the kind people use when they think you're exaggerating. "There was someone in the cabin," I said. "Your guest room bed was warm. Someone was walking around while I was downstairs. They used my food." Silence filled the line. Then she asked, carefully, "You're sure? Maybe Jasper heard an animal?" He growled at the door, and the window was broken into. "Your basement window." She exhaled. "That window sticks. It has for years. But there was mud." "Sweetheart," she cut in gently, "you've been overworked. The woods can play tricks. We've lived there 15 years. Nothing like this has ever happened." It felt like she was smoothing the story down, pressing out its details until only something harmless remained. "I'm not making this up," I said, voice cracking. I know you're scared. Why don't you come stay with us next month? Reset your nerves." It was like she was reading from a script designed to soothe children. We hung up, and I sat on the couch, shaking, Jasper resting his head in my lap. I stroked behind his ears, grounding myself in his warmth. But the thought kept rising, what if the intruder had been living there long before? What if the Millers didn't know? Or worse, what if they did? That night, a new fear settled into me, not the fear of the cabin, but the fear of how easily the world can dismiss you when something impossible happens. 2 days passed. I tried to work. I tried to walk Jasper without scanning every tree line, but the feeling didn't fade. I heard phantom creaks in my apartment. I woke up at 3:12 a.m., convinced footsteps were above my ceiling. My therapist once told me that trauma leaves impressions in the senses. It rewires what you hear, what you smell. But this wasn't that. Because on the third morning, when I stepped outside with Jasper, something was tucked under my doormat. Not a package, not mail. A protein bar. Same brand, same flavor. And the wrapper was slightly torn, as if someone had taken the first bite and decided to leave the rest for me. I staggered back inside, heart jackhammering. I locked the door twice. I checked all the windows. Jasper paced, whining, picking up whatever scent lingered on the wrapper. A human scent. Male. I called the police again. They sent a different officer, younger, polite, sympathetic, but unconvinced. Could be kids messing around, he suggested. Kids don't know what I eat, I said. You'd be surprised. People post a lot online. I didn't. Not anymore. He told me they'd keep an eye out and left. That night, every sound in my apartment felt amplified. I wore shoes to bed. Jasper slept facing the door, ears twitching. Around 2:40 a.m., the fridge clicked, and I bolted upright, sure someone was opening it. I didn't sleep again. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I would return to the cabin with police escort, gather the rest of my things, and get closure. The officer agreed to meet me at noon. I drove up ahead of them, needing to face the place in daylight. But as I pulled onto the long gravel road, my stomach caved. A light was on, inside the cabin. The guest room light. I parked far back, engine off, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. Jasper whined softly. I waited for the officer's car to appear behind me. When he finally arrived, relief flooded me. We approached together. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin smelled wrong. Stale sweat, damp fabric, a sourness beneath cedar, like someone had been living hard in a small, enclosed space. The officer moved ahead while I stayed near the doorway, every instinct screaming to leave. He stepped into the hall, paused, turned back. "Ma'am, you should see this." I forced myself forward. The guest room door was open. Inside, the bed, the one I'd seen warm days earlier, was now unmade, sheets twisted, pillowcase stained with a dark, oily patch where a head had rested. Beside the bed was something else. A pair of socks. Men's socks. Wet, with mud. Placed neatly, side by side at the foot of the bed. And on the dresser, my protein bars. 3 of them. Unwrapped. Half-eaten. As if someone had been waiting for me to come back and notice their hospitality. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. "He came back," I whispered. "He's been here." The officer frowned, flipping through the room. "Could be the same person from the other night. Could have slipped in after you left." But why organize my food? Why leave socks? Why turn on lights? The officer didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that made sense. We searched the rest of the cabin. No person. No footprints, except the old muddy ones on the deck. No signs of forced entry this time. It was like he'd just lived. Comfortably. Intimately. In a way that felt territorial. Driving home, I felt hollowed out, like he'd carved something out of me I couldn't name. That night, I tried to convince myself it was over. Until 4:08 a.m. when Jasper shot up, barking at the front door with a ferocity I'd never heard. I grabbed my phone, stumbling toward the peephole, but stopped inches before looking. Because on the other side of that door, I heard it. A soft, calm exhale. The same sound I'd heard in the cabin walls. A satisfied, patient breath. As if he was relieved. I'd made it home. The knocking, "Thanks for watching," with praz, and one. As if he'd followed me here. As if this, my apartment, was now the second place he lived. And the fear that keeps me awake isn't that he'll break in. It's that one night, when I finally look through that peephole, I'll see someone who looks like he belongs here. Someone comfortable. Someone waiting. Someone who thinks I'm the intruder. The night the shed light flicked on, I learned how quickly a quiet house can turn into a trap. I had been truly trying to believe that a weekend in my sister's place in Cedar Hollow could be good for me and my 4-year-old son, Ethan. Fresh air, a fenced yard, a chance to breathe without hearing my apartment neighbors yelling through thin walls. But the moment I stepped inside that house earlier that day, something in the air had paused, like the rooms had been waiting, holding their breath, listening. Still, I pushed through it. I needed the break. Ethan needed a break. God knows after the year we'd had the divorce, the move, the money problems, we deserved a weekend that wasn't threaded with tension. By dusk, snow dusted the yard, and the cold had a metallic tang that clung to the back of my tongue. I stood in the kitchen watching Ethan at the table, his small fingers gripping crayons, humming that soft little 4-note tune he always used when he was focused or comforted. Tap, 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 the same notes every time. It was one of the few things left that made him feel predictable. For once, I thought, maybe we'd get a peaceful night. Then, the shed light flicked on. That tiny bulb at the far end of the yard lit up in a square of pale yellow, hazy behind the frosted window. Snow reflected it faintly, making the yard glow just enough to see the silhouette inside. My breath stalled. Someone was in the shed. I leaned closer to the window, palms flattening on the cool glass. The shape inside was unmistakably human, broad shoulders, long arms, but it was the way the figure stood that froze something in my chest. He wasn't startled or defensive. He didn't turn when the light came on. He just held a pose. Hips twisted too far to one side, like something half broken. One arm lifted stiffly into the air, as if mid-wave but locked in place. His chin tipped so high, I thought the bones in his throat would snap. The posture was wrong. It was too still, too deliberate, like he wanted to be seen. Exactly like that. "Mommy?" Ethan's voice broke against my spine. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My eyes tracked the frozen figure as the bulb flickered once, making his outline shudder on the frosted glass. Then, without warning, the raised arm dropped with a sharp, twitching snap. He moved. Slow at first, then steady, walking toward the shed door, stepping out of view as if slipping between frames of a film. The backyard swallowed him. I grabbed Ethan by the shoulders. "Sweetheart, go to the hallway." "Why?" His voice quivered. "Just go." He obeyed, which scared me more than if he'd protested. I checked the back door locked. Front door locked. Every window latched down and tight. I tried to breathe slow, the way my therapist taught me. But each inhale felt shallow. The house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to shrink. Then, the tapping began. A soft, delicate tap, 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 tap on the living room window. My stomach sank through the floor. It was Ethan's tune. He was humming it earlier. The same 4 notes. Someone had heard it, memorized it, and was now knocking it back at us. A polite rhythm, crisp and precise, like a child repeating something they'd just learned. "Mom," Ethan whispered from behind me, hugging my leg. "Stop it." "I'm not doing anything," I said, voice thin. The tapping moved, window to window, each time the same rhythm, each time a little louder. Then the back doorknob started twitching. Soft, testing motions. Not brute force, just a curious wiggle, like someone checking if they could enter without sounding threatening. I backed into the hallway with Ethan, shutting us in with the laundry room door. I dialed 911, whispering everything I'd seen, the man, The shed, the tapping. "Stay inside," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on the way." But her voice felt far away, muffled under the next sound. Footsteps on the porch. Deliberate, slow. The boards creaked as he shifted his weight. We held our breath as the deadbolt trembled, as though he was leaning his forehead against the door and listening. I pressed my hand over Ethan's mouth. He trembled under my palm. Then, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Minutes passed, or an hour. I couldn't tell. When the red and blue lights finally washed over the living room walls, I nearly collapsed. I ran to the officers the second they knocked, rambling out everything: the pose, the walk from the shed, the mimicry. They searched the yard first. Their voices floated back through the cold night, clipped and careful. "There are footprints back here fresh. Looks like he circled the whole house. Tracks go back to the shed." When they opened the shed, their flashlights cut through dust and rust. The officers waved me over after a minute. Inside, I saw it, his path. Footprints big, heavy, leading straight through the center of the cluttered space, passing shelves of old rakes, metal pruners, saws, and shears. On some of the tools, someone had dragged their fingers through the dust-thin trails like soft, thoughtful touches, as if he'd been choosing. "He passed right by these," one officer said. "Didn't pick anything up, but he paused by them. I could see the places where he'd brushed against the metal, smearing dust, leaving faint, greasy prints." Ethan clung to my hip, silent, too silent. I forced myself to breathe as the officers recommended I stay with a neighbor for the night. I nodded, but my mind was hollow, everything echoing. I kept seeing the pose, that inhuman twist of hips, that lifted arm, that chin stretched toward the ceiling, that complete stillness as if he'd been waiting for an audience. Even as we left the house, I felt eyes in the yard, watching, rehearsing. Back at my sister's house the next morning, sunlight felt too thin to matter. Sleep hadn't found me. Ethan had cried himself silent. Even now, his little fingers wrapped around my sweater with a grip that felt more like survival than affection. I tried to convince myself daylight meant safety, but shadows pooled under every countertop and doorway. My skin prickled as if the house remembered what had happened, as if it expected it to happen again. I kept checking the backyard, my eyes pulled toward the shed every few minutes. The door sat slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed that last night. Had it been open then? Had the officers left it? Or had someone reopened it after they left? By noon, I couldn't take the uncertainty. I bundled Ethan in his jacket and decided we'd leave early, drive home, pretend the weekend had been nothing but a misunderstanding. But when I opened the hallway closet to grab Ethan's boots, I froze. A faint smell drifted out, metallic, dusty like old tools in winter. And beneath the boots, on the carpet, were tiny flecks of frost. I crouched, touching one, cold, fresh. It made no sense. I slammed the closet door shut so hard it rattled. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small, hoarse from crying. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But the moment I stepped into the living room, something in the atmosphere shifted so subtly, I almost missed it. A hush, like the house lowering its voice. A shift in air pressure. My ears buzzed faintly, like after a loud concert. Then Ethan tugged my sleeve. "Mom, he's here." My mouth went dry. Who? He pointed at the back door. I didn't see anyone, but I felt presence, heavy and patient, pressed against the other side of the glass. A shadow, maybe. Or just the shape of expectation. "Ethan," I whispered. "Stay behind me." When I reached for the blinds, my hands shook so violently the cords tangled. I forced myself to lift just one corner of the fabric, just enough to glance outside. Nothing. Just the yard, and the shed, and fresh snow beginning to fall. I exhaled shakily. Then something moved inside the shed. A small shift barely noticeable, but I saw it. A figure shifting weight, as if bracing to stand straighter. My heart pounded like a fist in my ears. He was back. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and lifted Ethan into my arms. We headed toward the front door, but Ethan stiffened suddenly and clutched my shoulders. "Mom," he whispered faintly. He learned my voice. And then, soft and perfect Ethan's own 4-note tune floated from the back patio door. Not from my son. From outside. Tap, 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 tap on the glass. I ran. We reached the car in seconds, snow crunching under my boots, cold slicing my throat. I buckled Ethan into his seat with shaking hands, sprinted around to the driver's side, and tore out of the driveway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until we'd turned 3 corners. But when I finally did, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road far behind us. Still, watching. No coat, no hat, just a tall, unnatural silhouette in the bleeding whiteness of the falling snow. The same twisted posture. That broken mannequin stance. I drove faster. By the time we reached my apartment 2 hours later, I'd convinced myself we were safe. My building had locks, neighbors, motion sensor lights, noise, civilization. But as night crept in and Ethan finally fell asleep on the couch, a new fear began pulling at me, slow, deliberate, like a tugging rope. What if he had followed us? What if he had learned more than Ethan's voice? I checked the windows 3 times, the deadbolt twice. I even pushed a chair under the doorknob. Everything was still and warm and normal. I sat beside Ethan and watched his tiny chest rise and fall. His hum earlier still echoed in my mind. 4 soft notes, innocent, rhythmic, strangely comforting. Tap, 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 tap. I stroked his hair, trying to calm the jitter in my own muscles. Then, from the hallway, a gentle sound broke the quiet. Tap, 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 tap. Not on glass. On wood. On the inside of my apartment door. My whole body froze. The sound repeated, softer this time. Slow, purposeful. The same rhythm. The one Ethan hummed. The one the man had mimicked in the yard. The one he had tapped on the windows. Something slid softly along the doorframe, like fingertips tracing the shape of the lock. I reached for Ethan, pulling him close. The tapping stopped. Then a new sound came so faint, I wouldn't have heard it if I hadn't been holding my breath. A whisper. A low, practiced whisper that carried the cadence of my son's voice. Mommy. Not Ethan. The voice came from the door, from just inches away. My skin iced over, my throat closed. I pressed my hand against Ethan's back, feeling his warmth, his tiny heartbeat. The whisper came again, a breathy, perfect mimicry. Mommy, open. I didn't move, couldn't. The doorknob turned a fraction, stopped, turned back. A deliberate test. A patient 1. Snow began to fall outside, soft flakes tapping against the window, like distant applause. The doorknob twitched again, and I realized with perfect clarity, he wasn't trying to break in. He was waiting to see if I'd let him. The tapping returned, light, polite. Tap, 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 matching my son's innocent little hum. The one he thought no one else knew. The one someone had learned in the cold shed light. And followed all the way home. And, The summer of 2015 was a blur of deadlines, side jobs, and late nights that always ended with me hunched over my sketchpad. I was 20 then, a graphic design student in Redwood Hills, California, clinging to the hope that if I worked hard enough, something would break my way. Tuition bills never stopped arriving, and my mom, already stretched thin paying rent, couldn't help much. I had promised myself that summer I would focus on my portfolio for a contest that offered an internship. It felt like my chance to breathe, to finally get noticed. Babysitting wasn't part of the plan that night. My sketchpad was open across my lap when the phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Myers. She sounded rushed, almost frantic. Their usual sitter had canceled last minute, and she begged me to come watch the kids so she and her husband could catch a movie they'd planned for weeks. I hesitated. I really did. But when she offered extra pay and mentioned how much the kids liked me, guilt gnawed at my stubbornness. I said yes, grabbed my bag, and walked the few blocks to Sycamore Lane. The Myers house was big and modern, the kind with long hallways that swallowed sound and made you wonder why people needed so many rooms. Inside, it smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The kids, Noah, 10, and Lucy, 7, were already in their pajamas, winding down for the night. They were good kids, quiet, polite, easy to handle. Mrs. Myers gave me the emergency list, kissed the kids, and hurried out with her husband. By 9:30, I had tucked both children into bed upstairs. Lucy wanted her nightlight on, and Noah insisted on keeping his door cracked open. I told them I'd be downstairs if they needed anything, then padded back down to the living room. For the first time all day, I let myself relax. I sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels on their massive flat-screen TV. It was the kind of television you couldn't imagine affording in a student apartment. I scrolled on my phone, half watching, half sketching ideas in my notebook. That was when it happened. The TV flickered. Not static. Something else. The screen blinked, and for less than a second I swore I saw a hallway. Not a movie. Not a commercial. A hallway that looked eerily like the one upstairs in the Myers house. I blinked hard. My rational side pushed it away. Maybe an input glitch, maybe some interference. I switched the channel and brushed it off. But the image burned in my mind long after it disappeared. I was still thinking about it when Lucy's small voice echoed down the stairwell. "Elena, can you turn the TV down? Someone's talking really loud in the hallway." The remote slipped from my hand. My throat tightened. I shot up from the couch, heart racing. Upstairs, the hallway was empty. Silent. I checked both bedrooms. Lucy was trembling under her blanket, Noah half asleep but annoyed. I forced a smile. "It's just the storm rattling the windows," I told her. She nodded reluctantly, clutching her stuffed bear. But when I walked back downstairs, the silence of that house pressed in on me heavier than before. At 10:47 p.m., the landline rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the shrill sound. Who even used landlines anymore? I told myself it had to be the Myers checking in, so I answered quickly. "Hello?" What I heard wasn't their voice. It was male. Distorted. Low, almost like it was crawling through static. "Don't look at the TV." Then the line cut. I stood frozen with the receiver pressed against my ear, pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. My first instinct was denial. A prank, I thought. Wrong number. My imagination filling in the rest. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my stomach knotted. I turned toward the living room. The television was on again, but no channel played. The screen showed something else, a live feed. I knew it immediately. It was the kids' bedroom. I recognized the little bookshelf, the window, the nightlight, and Noah and Lucy, fast asleep. I dropped the phone. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me upstairs. I tore through their room, ripping open the closet, yanking open drawers, looking under the bed. Nothing. The children stirred, confused and half asleep. "Everything's okay," I lied. My voice cracked. Noah mumbled something that froze me. He smiles too much. "I don't like the man who keeps standing in the corner." I stared at him, my chest tight. He was still asleep, his words drifting out like fragments of a dream. But they didn't feel like dreams. I grabbed both kids, dragging blankets and all, and hauled them downstairs. My hands shook so hard I dropped my phone twice. I locked every door, every window. The kids looked at me wide-eyed but didn't protest. When I glanced back at the TV, the feed was gone, just static. I tried to call the Myers on my cell. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried my mom too. Nothing. My bars flickered like the phone couldn't decide whether it had service or not. The landline rang again. The sound sliced through the silence. My hands trembled as I answered, hoping, praying. It was the parents. It wasn't. The same distorted male voice whispered slower this time. "Why did you look?" I slammed the phone down and grabbed the kids tighter. Lucy whimpered, pressing her face into my sweater. Noah asked, "Who keeps calling?" But I didn't answer. I wanted to run out the front door, but the thought of stepping into the pitch-black street with 2 kids felt worse. My only option was to hold out until the Myers or someone came back. I pulled them onto the couch with me, forcing a smile. "Sleepover. We're camping out here, okay?" They nodded reluctantly. I pretended to watch cartoons on mute, trying to distract them. But my eyes kept darting to the shadows in the hallway, the staircase, the blank TV screen. At 11:22, the screen lit again. My stomach dropped. This time the feed wasn't upstairs. It was the living room. The 3 of us, huddled together on the couch. And in the background, near the cabinet, a figure. Tall, lean, head slightly tilted, smiling. I spun around. The cabinet was empty. No one was there. But the feed, grainy, black and white, showed him standing there like he belonged in the room with us. I couldn't think straight. My mind scrambled between protecting the kids, figuring out where the cameras were, and fighting the urge to scream. I forced myself to grab the landline again. "No one. What's your emergency?" The voice of the dispatcher nearly made me cry with relief. I stammered everything. The calls, the TV, the kids, the figure. She told me to stay calm, that officers were already on their way, to lock myself in a room if possible. Minutes passed like hours. I paced with the phone clutched to my ear, the kids clinging to my legs. Then we heard it, a faint creak from above us, the attic. I thought my heart stopped. I whispered it into the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay put. By the time red and blue lights flashed outside the house, I nearly collapsed from relief. Officers swept the home, their heavy boots pounding against the floorboards. They ordered us outside. I wrapped the kids in blankets and carried them to the squad car. When the police returned, their faces were pale. In the attic, hidden behind insulation, they found a small camera system. Wires snaked down into the cabinet in the living room. Cigarette butts and soda cans were shoved into a corner. Someone had been living up there, watching, recording, for weeks, maybe longer. The Myers came home just as the officers were finishing. Mrs. Myers cried, clutching her kids like she'd never let go again. Mr. Myers' face was grim, his hand gripping mine like he was afraid I'd disappear too. They apologized over and over, but I could barely hear them. My mind was stuck on the images burned into my brain. Noah's half-asleep warning, Lucy's trembling voice, the man on the TV feed smiling from the corner of the room. I never babysat again after that night. The money wasn't worth it. My sketches, my contest, even my dream of an internship, all of it seemed trivial compared to the reality that someone had been there, living above, watching. Months later, when life had started to feel normal again, it happened. I opened my laptop to check email, scrolling through spam and school notices. One message stopped me cold. No subject, no sender I recognized, just an attachment. I clicked it before I could stop myself. The photo was grainy, black and white. It was me, sitting on the Myers couch that night. My face pale, eyes locked on the television. And in the corner, blurred but unmistakable, that same figure. Smiling, safety isn't guaranteed just because a house feels secure or because a neighborhood seems quiet. Evil doesn't always break the door down. Sometimes it hides in the spaces we never think to check. Trusting your instincts, taking fear seriously, and never ignoring the small signs, that's what keeps us safe. Fear can be paralyzing, but it can also be the voice that saves your life. Always listen to it. When I look back at the summer of 2015, I remember the heat more than anything else. Denver always has its warm days, but that year seemed unbearable. Maybe it was the stress of new motherhood still lingering in my bones. Maybe it was the constant tug of my career, or maybe it was simply the suffocating weight of responsibility that made every breath feel heavy. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 years old at the time, a marketing consultant trying to climb the ladder at my firm. After 5 months of maternity leave, I had returned to a whirlwind of deadlines and conference calls, and though I tried to put on a brave face, I was drowning. My husband, Daniel, was supportive, but he was fighting his own battles at work, staying late at the office more nights than not. Our daughter, Maya, had just turned 5, and she was the brightest part of my day, the reason I forced myself out of bed every morning. But loving her didn't erase the exhaustion that ate away at me. We needed help. Not just any help. Someone trustworthy. Someone who could ease the pressure without adding to it. I resisted the idea of daycare because I wanted Maya's evenings to feel warm and personal. A babysitter seemed like the best compromise. That's when Sophie Lane came into our lives. I met her through a neighbor who said Sophie had been looking for work. She was 21, soft-spoken, with an almost fragile demeanor. She told me she had dropped out of college because of finances and was saving money to go back. She didn't come across like most girls her age. No loud attitude, no cockiness, just polite, attentive, and almost eager to please. Maya adored her from the start. I still remember that first evening when Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room floor building Lego castles with her. Maya laughed harder than I had heard in weeks. Watching them, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Within weeks, Sophie had become part of our routine. She arrived on time, never complained, and carried herself with a patience that seemed rare for someone so young. She learned Maya's favorite bedtime stories by heart. She even brought over her own coloring books so she and Maya could draw together. Daniel and I started calling her our third hand. But even then, I can admit now, there was a faint unease that I pushed away. I couldn't quite name it. Maybe it was the way Sophie's eyes lingered on our house when she thought no one was watching. Or maybe it was how she always seemed to know where everything was, even in rooms I hadn't shown her. It was subtle, just a flicker of something in my gut. Still, life demanded trust. When you're exhausted, you want to believe you found someone safe to lean on. And so I let Sophie in. I told myself it was the right choice. I told myself she was family. And for a time, that's exactly what she felt like. The first time I noticed something missing, it was only a $20 bill. I had tucked it into the side pocket of my purse, planning to use it for coffee and parking the next day. When I reached for it, it was gone. I blamed myself. Maybe I had spent it and forgotten. Maybe Daniel had grabbed it without telling me. Life with a child is messy, disorganized, cluttered. I pushed the thought aside. But then it happened again. A pair of small gold earrings I wore often, delicate hoops Daniel had given me for our anniversary, disappeared from my jewelry box. This time I knew I hadn't misplaced them. I searched the bedroom 3 times, emptied the laundry basket, checked every drawer. Nothing. When I told Daniel, he shrugged. The gym or at work. You've been running on fumes. Maybe you lost them, and I wanted to believe him. But something in my chest tightened. The earrings had been on the dresser that morning. I remembered because I'd chosen not to wear them. They hadn't simply vanished. A week later, I walked into the living room and saw Sophie leaning close to Maya, whispering. Maya was smiling, nodding eagerly. When Sophie noticed me, she straightened quickly, her face flushed. "What's going on?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," Sophie said with a nervous laugh. "We were just playing pretend." But later that night, while tucking Maya into bed, she said something that made my heart stop. "Mommy, Sophie says some things are our little secret, like when she tells me special stuff. She said you don't have to know everything." The words lodged in my throat. Secrets. Between my daughter and her babysitter. I smiled for Maya's sake, kissed her forehead, and told her good night. But as soon as I closed her door, I leaned against the wall and felt my pulse race. Something was wrong. I couldn't accuse Sophie outright, not without proof. If I was wrong, I'd not only ruin a relationship that had become central to our lives, but I'd also risk looking paranoid. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, lying awake next to Daniel, I whispered, "What if Sophie's been stealing from us?" He sighed. Don't start imagining things. She's been good to Maya. Don't overthink it." I wanted to scream. Why was it always overthinking when my instinct spoke? So I made a decision. If no one else would take my concerns seriously, I'd get the truth myself. The next day, I bought a small nanny cam. The camera was small, discreet, and easy to hide on a bookshelf in the living room. I told myself it was just to ease my mind. Maybe I'd catch nothing but hours of Maya playing and Sophie reading her magazines. Maybe then I'd finally be able to sleep without replaying the whispers and the missing jewelry in my head. The first 2 days were uneventful. Sophie and Maya colored, watched cartoons, played with dolls. Sophie looked like any ordinary sitter. Attentive, patient, gentle. But on the third day, everything changed. I watched the footage late that night after Maya had gone to bed. Daniel was still at the office, so I sat alone with the laptop open on the kitchen table. My finger hovered over the play button longer than it should have. At first, it was normal. Maya on the rug drawing while Sophie flipped through her phone. But then, when Maya wandered upstairs for a toy, Sophie's posture shifted. She set her phone down, glanced toward the stairs, and then moved quickly to the sideboard. She opened the drawer, rifled through envelopes, and pulled out cash. My stomach dropped as I watched her slide the bills into her bag. I kept watching, numb. Later in the footage, she slipped one of Maya's bracelets into her pocket. At one point, she crouched by the cabinet where we kept spare keys and rummaged as if searching for something. By the end of the video, my hands were shaking so hard I had to close the laptop. I had my proof. When Daniel came home, I showed him. He swore under his breath, pacing the kitchen. You were right." "Jesus, of course I was right," I snapped, though my voice cracked. "Maya. She's been stealing from us. He rubbed his face. "What do we do?" I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to call the police that second. Another part wanted to confront her myself, to see her face when I told her I knew. But mostly I wanted to scream. I had let this girl into my home. I had trusted her with my daughter, and she had betrayed every ounce of that trust. The next day, I asked Sophie to come over early. I told her we needed to talk. Sophie arrived wearing her usual polite smile, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Maya ran to hug her, and for a brief, painful second I almost doubted myself again. But then I remembered the video. "Maya, sweetheart," I said gently, to talk to Sophie. "Why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy needs." Maya skipped upstairs, leaving us alone. I turned to Sophie. "We need to have a serious conversation." Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said flatly. "It isn't. I know you've been stealing from us." Her face went pale. "What? No, I would never. Don't lie to me." I slammed the laptop shut on the table where I'd queued up the footage. "I have everything on video. You went through our drawers. You took money, jewelry. You even took Maya's bracelet." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head quickly, then covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. Please, Emily. I didn't know what else to do." Her voice cracked with desperation. Between sobs, she spilled the truth. She was drowning in credit card debt, behind on rent, barely scraping by. She said she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. She said she thought she could just borrow until she got back on her feet. I stared at her, my chest tight. Secrets from me. Borrow? You manipulated my daughter. You told her to keep her hands dropped from her face. She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. I didn't mean it like that. God, I didn't know what else to do. Please don't call the police, I'll pay it back. Every cent, just give me another chance. For a moment, the room was silent except for her sobs. I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to believe her. But all I could think about was Maya, about her innocent trust being twisted. "No," I said finally. My voice was cold. "You don't get another chance." I told Sophie to leave immediately. She begged again, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't waver. I opened the door and stood there until she walked out clutching her bag. After she left, I locked every door and window in the house. Then I went upstairs to Maya's room. She was curled up on her bed with a stuffed rabbit, humming to herself. When she saw me, she smiled. "Is Sophie coming back tomorrow?" she asked. I hesitated. "No, honey, she won't be babysitting anymore." "Why not?" I tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "More time together." "Because Mommy decided it's better if we spend—" She nodded sleepily, satisfied with the answer, but my chest ached with the knowledge that she had trusted Sophie more than anyone outside our family. That trust had been broken. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't bring myself to hire another babysitter. Daniel suggested it a few times, but I always shook my head. The thought of letting another stranger into our home made my stomach twist. I arranged my schedule differently, worked from home when I could, and leaned on family for help. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way I felt safe. I kept the nanny cam footage saved on a flash drive, though I never looked at it again. Just knowing it existed was enough. Proof of what happens when you ignore your instincts. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the little moments I brushed off, the missing earrings, the whispers, the unease I couldn't explain. If I had trusted those feelings sooner, maybe I could have spared us weeks of betrayal. But I learned my lesson, and I never forgot it. Trust is precious, and once broken, it cannot easily be repaired. We often silence our instincts to avoid conflict or to appear reasonable, but those instincts exist for a reason. Blind trust, even in the people who seem kindest or most harmless, can invite danger into our homes. Always listen to your gut. Protect the ones who rely on you, and remember that trust must be earned, not assumed. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if the choices I made that night were really choices at all, or if I was just drifting into a current I couldn't escape. My name is Clara Jensen, and in the spring of 2017 I was 22 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I wasn't anyone special. I wasn't particularly brave or reckless. I was just trying to keep my head above water, splitting myself between 2 part-time jobs and classes at the local community college. Psychology had been my major, though most nights I felt too tired to believe I would ever graduate. Money was always the problem. Rent, books, food. It never stopped piling up. That's why babysitting had slipped into my life like an accident that made sense. I told myself it was easier than waitressing or pulling coffee for strangers. And at first it was. Kids were unpredictable, but honest. And a quiet night in a family's living room gave me a kind of borrowed stability I didn't have in my own life. That Friday evening started ordinary. I was sitting in the Reynolds living room, watching their kids. Eli, who was 8, thoughtful and serious beyond his years, and Hannah, who was 6 and still lived in the endless sunshine of early childhood. Their parents had left for a dinner party across town. I'd been asked to keep the kids fed, get them ready for bed, and then, once their cab arrived at 10:45, ride with them across the city to their grandmother's house. The Reynolds were protective, the kind of parents who double-checked every door lock before leaving, so it didn't strike me as unusual that they prearranged the ride. It was raining that night, a thin drizzle tapping on the windows. Eli and Hannah sat cross-legged on the floor, building a crooked tower of blocks, their giggles filling the room. I remember thinking it was one of those nights where nothing bad could happen. That was the lie life was telling me then. When the cab finally pulled up, I gathered their backpacks, jackets, and snacks. The driver stepped out and waved. He looked to be in his mid-40s, stocky, with thinning hair and a smile that seemed worn from too much use, the kind of smile someone wears when they want to be liked before they're really seen. "Evening, folks," he said warmly, his voice carrying through the drizzle. Of this weather. Hop in. Let's get you out. The kids slid into the back seat. I climbed in after them, buckling Hannah's seatbelt before fastening my own. The driver glanced at us in the mirror and pulled away smoothly. For a few minutes, it was nothing. Streetlights flickering on wet pavement, windshield wipers sweeping rhythmically, the sound of children whispering to each other about cartoons. I texted their grandmother. On our way. See you soon? She sent a quick heart emoji back and I felt reassured. But then I noticed something that scraped against my nerves. The driver kept adjusting the rearview mirror, not to watch the traffic but to study the kids. Every time Hannah giggled, his lips curled into a faint smile. It was small, almost harmless, but I felt my stomach tighten anyway. I told myself not to overthink it. People glance at kids all the time. Still, I found myself looking away from the mirror. We drove another 5 minutes before I realized we should have turned left toward the highway. Instead, the driver turned right, down a narrow street lined with shuttered warehouses. "Excuse me," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I think you missed the turn," he chuckled softly, his eyes on the road. "Relax. Shortcut." Rain pattered harder against the windows. My phone buzzed, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I gripped it tighter. That was the moment the night began to bend into something I would never forget. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't show fear in front of the kids. Eli leaned toward me, his voice small and tight. "This doesn't look like the way to Grandma's." I smiled as if nothing was wrong. "It's fine, buddy. Just a different route." But my palms were clammy against my jeans. I checked the locks casually, tugging at the handle. Nothing. Child lock. The driver's eyes flicked up in the mirror, watching. "Everything good back there?" "Yeah," I answered quickly, my throat dry. "All good." I needed to think. My mind ran through possibilities. Was this guy really dangerous, or just weird? Could I call the grandmother? If I made a scene, would that scare the kids more? Pretending to be casual, I dialed the grandmother's number. I spoke loudly into the phone. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. We're about 10 minutes away. Yes, the driver is taking the usual highway route." For the first time, the driver's smile faltered. His hands tightened on the wheel and he pressed the accelerator just slightly harder. My stomach dropped. The rain grew heavier, blurring the streetlights into pale smears. The buildings around us looked abandoned, their windows boarded and dark. That's when my phone buzzed again. I expected a reply from the grandmother, but the notification wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "Stop talking. They can't hear you." The words punched the air from my lungs. My first thought was that someone had hacked me, but that didn't make sense. I hadn't given my number to anyone but the Reynolds. I stared at the screen too long. The driver must have noticed because he said almost gently, "You okay back there?" "Yeah," I said quickly, stuffing the phone into my jacket. My pulse thudded in my ears. At the next red light, the only car we'd seen in 15 minutes, another vehicle pulled up behind us. Desperation surged through me. I rolled down my window halfway and leaned out, waving frantically. The driver snapped his head toward me. His voice was sharp now, stripped of friendliness. "Your hands back inside." The light turned green. He hit the gas. The kids clung to my arms, their little fingers digging in. Eli whispered, "Clara, what's happening?" I tried to answer, but my phone buzzed again. Another message, same number. "You shouldn't have done that. Now we're not going to Grandma's." I tasted metal in my mouth, fear so sharp it felt physical. I realized this was no misunderstanding. Whoever this man was, he wasn't taking us to safety. And we were trapped. My instinct was to scream, to throw myself at the door, but panic would only fuel his control. I forced myself to breathe. "Think, Clara. Think." The city felt miles away now. The streets we drove through were silent, the rain masking every sound. The kids huddled close, their earlier chatter gone, replaced with frightened silence. I pulled my phone out again, hiding it against my thigh. I typed a text to the grandmother. "Call police, driver not going to you, wrong route, please hurry." I hit send, no signal. My heart dropped. Of course, these industrial zones were dead spots. The driver glanced into the mirror, his eyes darker now. "Phone's down, miss. Let's just enjoy the ride." His voice had lost its softness. It carried something heavier, something that made my skin crawl. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep steady. He smiled faintly. "Someplace quiet. Safer than the highway in this weather." "That's not what the parents arranged." He chuckled. "Parents don't always know what's best, do they?" I felt Eli's hand squeeze mine. He knew. Hannah pressed her face against my arm, too scared to look up. The car slowed as we turned down an even narrower street. The warehouses gave way to chain-link fences and empty lots. The road was nearly dark except for the dull glow of a single street lamp ahead. I had one chance. "Sir," I said, my voice firmer, "pull over now. Let us out." He didn't respond. His hands gripped the wheel like stone. I reached forward suddenly, grabbing at the gear shift. He roared, hand away, the car swerving hard against the curb before he straightened it. "Sit back," and shoved my. The kids screamed. I pulled back, shaking. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would tear out of my chest. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text. "Don't fight him. Don't make him angry. We're almost there." I stared at the words, horror crawling through me. Whoever was texting knew exactly where we were. The driver slowed, pulling toward a fenced lot with a single warehouse lit by one flickering bulb. He turned into the gravel drive, tires crunching. I knew then we had minutes left before something irreversible happened, and I had to act. The car rolled to a stop near the warehouse. The rain softened, but the silence it left behind was worse. The driver killed the engine. For a moment, the only sound was our ragged breathing. He turned slowly in his seat, his smile gone. His eyes fixed on me. "Since you got in this car, you've been a problem." Eli's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. Hannah whimpered, burying her face. I swallowed, forcing courage I didn't feel. "The Reynolds know where we are. They'll call the police." He chuckled low, shaking his head. "You really think anyone's coming?" His words cut like knives. My brain raced. There had to be a way out. He reached for the keys, slipping them into his pocket. Then he opened his door, ordered, "All of you. Out!" He panic flared. Once outside, I knew we'd have no protection. The lot was surrounded by fence, the warehouse looming like a dark mouth. "No," I said, surprising even myself. My voice cracked but held. "We're not getting out." His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Before I could answer, headlights swept across the lot. Another car had turned in, its beams cutting through the rain. The driver froze. I didn't think. I threw my weight against my door, slamming it open. "Run!" I screamed. The kids bolted, their small shoes splashing on wet gravel. I grabbed my phone and scrambled out after them, heart hammering. The other car screeched closer, horn blaring. The driver cursed, lunging back toward his seat. I didn't look back. I grabbed Eli and Hannah's hands and ran toward the fence. The metal links rattled as I climbed, shoving the kids over first. My jeans tore on the wire, my palms burning, but adrenaline carried me. Behind us, the driver roared in rage. The engine of his car revved, tires spitting gravel. We tumbled over the fence and hit the wet ground on the other side. I grabbed the kids, hauling them toward the street. Headlights blinded us again. The second car skidded to a stop just feet away. The door burst open, 2 men in uniforms, security guards. They shouted, "What's happening?" I sobbed the words. "He tried to take us, he's still in there." But when they turned, the warehouse lot was empty. The cab was gone. The police came within minutes. I told them everything, voice shaking. Every detail from the moment we left the Reynolds house to the text messages on my phone. They took the phone, nodding gravely, but when they checked the number, it was untraceable. A burner. The Reynolds arrived soon after, pale and terrified. Hannah ran into her mother's arms, sobbing. Eli clung to his father. I stood apart, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The officers searched the area, but they found nothing. No trace of the cab, no trace of the man. It was as if he had vanished into the night. In the days that followed, the police called me for updates, but nothing ever came of it. They couldn't find the car, the driver, or the origin of the texts. The Reynolds were furious at the cab company, but even they swore no such driver had been dispatched under their name. For months afterward, I couldn't ride in a stranger's car. Every time a man glanced in the mirror, my skin prickled with fear. Nights became worse. I'd wake to the sound of my phone buzzing, convinced I'd see another message. You shouldn't have done that. But it never came. Years later, I still think of that night, of the rain, the children's hands in mine, the sick feeling of being hunted. I never stopped babysitting entirely, but I learned to trust my instincts more than politeness. Because sometimes the difference between safety and danger is the moment you decide not to stay quiet. Trust your instincts, especially when others depend on you. Danger rarely announces itself with certainty. It often comes disguised in politeness, in routine, in small moments that feel off, but easy to dismiss. Ignoring those feelings can cost more than we imagine, but listening to them, speaking up, taking action, can be the very thing that saves lives. I've always believed that certain places carry the weight of stories long before anyone puts them into words. Long back, during one of those restless years in my mid-20s when I was trying to convince myself that studying human behavior would help me understand my own, I agreed to take a week-long house-sitting job far outside my comfort zone. The arrangement felt easy. An old acquaintance of a classmate owned a luxury glass villa tucked into the mountains near Natfjord Ridge in Fjellheim. I figured the solitude would give me a rare chance to focus on my thesis and breathe away the noise of Oslo's crowded streets. When I arrived at Skogkammerveg 17, the villa didn't just look expensive, it looked almost vulnerable. Wide, transparent walls faced the sleeping valley, and the tall pines surrounding the property leaned like quiet witnesses. Winter had come down hard that week. Snow drifted, sideways in sheets, muffling the world until even my boots seemed afraid to crunch. Inside, everything hummed with sleek confidence. Climate control panels, motion-triggered, lights, a whole security system with cameras that covered every angle. The owner, Henrik, had walked me through it all over a long video call before I arrived. The house watches itself, he had said proudly. Nothing to worry about, but I've learned something important about psychologists in training. We notice emotions before logic, fear before facts, and from the moment the last light faded behind the mountains, the glass villa felt too open to the world, as if anything standing out there could see me better than I could see it. By late evening, the wind settled into a low, steady howl. I made tea, opened my laptop, and tried to force myself into academic mode. Yet the silence inside the villa was different. It was the kind that pressed in on you, waiting for you to slip. Then, around 11 p.m., the hallway lights flickered, not fully off, more like a pulse. I checked the control panel. No motion detected, no errors, just that eerie glitch. I told myself it was the storm messing with something electrical. I almost believed it, too, until I glanced at the patio camera monitor. A tall figure in a dark parka stood perfectly still beside the glass like he'd been there long before I looked. I rushed to the window, heart hammering. Nothing, only snow twisting in the wind. I tried to laugh it off, but some part of me knew my week at Natfjord Ridge had already shifted into something I wasn't ready for. I leaned closer to the monitor, replaying the few seconds the camera had captured. The figure didn't move like a trick of the light. No blur from blowing snow, no distortion, just a man, standing with a posture too deliberate to be accidental. I scanned the villa again, listening for anything out of place. The heating vents whispered. The refrigerator clicked. Ordinary things, normal things. Yet my skin tingled with that old, primal warning humans get before their minds catch up. Then I heard it, a faint click from downstairs. It carried the unmistakable sound of a door latching shut, soft, hesitant, almost polite. I froze, unable to justify it with any logical explanation. I knew which doors I had used. I knew they were closed. "Hello?" I called out, even though it was the last thing I should have done. The villa swallowed my voice. I turned back to the monitor, but the screen had changed. The figure was no longer outside. He stood half hidden behind the utility shelves inside the mudroom corridor. His head was angled, upward toward the staircase. Toward me. My throat tightened. How did he get in? I whispered to myself, though the question had no comfort in it. The doors were coded, the windows sealed. The security system should have alerted me. The worst part wasn't that he was there. It was that he seemed to already know where I was, standing. When he moved, it wasn't slow or cautious, it was a sudden, aggressive sprint toward the loft, stairs. I heard the wooden steps creak under his weight, heavy and determined. Adrenaline overtook reason. I shoved a chair under the loft door, pressing my weight against it. Every thud of his boots on the stairs vibrated through the wood beneath me. I felt like the house itself was holding its breath with me. Why is this happening? Slipped out of my mouth before I even realized I said it, but the answer came from my own training. Intruders don't need reasons. Fear doesn't need logic. And danger doesn't always knock, it sometimes enters quietly, then runs. I scanned the loft for another exit. There wasn't one. The only way out was down, and down was where he was. I didn't have time to think, I only had time to move. The pounding on the loft door shook the entire frame, each hit cracking through the silence like something trying to break open the night itself. I grabbed the nearest thing with any weight, an iron candle stand, and held it like a weapon I had no idea how to use. Another hit, a creak. The chair wedged beneath the door groaned under pressure. "Come on, Elara," I whispered. "Think. Move." I scanned the loft again, desperate. A narrow window stretched across the wall, beautiful during the day and useless during a panic except for the small panel that opened for ventilation. Beneath it, a deep snowdrift hugged the exterior wall. The door behind me splintered. I dropped the candle stand, lunged for the window, and pushed the panel outward. A burst of winter air slapped me across the face, sharp and punishing. I didn't let myself reconsider. I climbed onto the ledge, braced my palms, and kicked at the lower glass panel with everything I had. It cracked, then shattered. The sound barely registered before I launched myself through the opening. For a terrifying second, I free fell. Then the snow caught me like a cold, merciless mattress, swallowing me up to my shoulders. The shock knocked the air out of me, and for a moment, I thought the snow might bury me alive before he ever had a chance. But I forced myself upright, gasping. Behind me, the broken window glowed like a jagged wound in the villa's wall. I heard no shout, no footsteps, nothing, just the storm swallowing every sound. I crawled through the snow, dragging myself toward the driveway where a thin signal might reach my phone. The cold burned deep, like tiny needles in every breath. I dialed emergency services with fingers that barely bent. When the call connected, I managed only someone's inside the house. He chased me. The dispatcher's calm voice should have soothed me. It didn't. Not when I saw movement near the far corner of the villa, a flash of dark fabric, a figure slipping behind the pines. He didn't run toward me. He ran away, as if he'd already gotten what he wanted. The police arrived 20 minutes later, sirens softened by the storm. 3 officers scanned the property, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the swirling snow. Their calm, procedural movements almost made me doubt what I saw almost. Inside, the villa felt different now, violated, smaller. The officers moved strategically, checking corners, closets, entry points. One of them, Officer Dalby, knelt beside the mudroom shelf where the figure had stood in the footage. Muddy boot prints, he noted. Fresh. Someone was definitely inside. Another officer held up a pry bar found on the floor near the pantry. Someone forced their way, tampered in. Smart system or not, this door frame's been tampered with. I wrapped the emergency blanket tighter around my shoulders, not sure if I was shivering from cold or adrenaline. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow felt like an echo of what happened. When they reviewed the camera footage, their expressions tightened. "That's no trick of the snow," Dalby said quietly, and he didn't get in through the glass. "Look," he traced the intruder's path. He knew exactly where the blind spots were. "How?" I asked. The officers exchanged glances. Dalby finally said, "Maybe he'd been here before." The idea sat heavy in my stomach. I thought back to the owner, the man I barely knew. Henrik had mentioned that a renovation team, landscapers, and a tech crew had worked on the villa earlier that year. Any of them could have memorized access points or blind angles, or maybe someone else had been watching the villa for months. While the officers finished clearing the house, Dalby approached me again. "Who else knew you were staying here?" "Just Henrik," I said, "and a few classmates." "And you didn't see the intruder's face?" "No, just his height, his jacket, the way I hesitated, the way he moved, like he was tracking me using the cameras." Dalby folded his arms. "That's possible. A lot of smart home systems can be accessed remotely, if someone knows what they're doing." A chill ran through me. "So he wasn't breaking in blind?" I asked. "No," he answered. He knew exactly when to move. The officers stayed until sunrise, securing the property before driving me to a small local station to file reports. The villa looked peaceful again as we pulled away, almost innocent, but I knew better now. Peace is often just the surface. The truth sits underneath, waiting for the right moment to show itself. I returned to Oslo the following day. The city felt louder than usual, as if it were trying to shake the silence of Natfjord Ridge out of me. Friends asked if I was okay. Professors offered extensions on assignments. My parents pushed for me to come home for a while, but I kept replaying the same moment, the way the figure appeared inside the villa without any alert, how he moved with purpose, how he vanished into the forest instead of confronting me outside. Fear has a way of turning unanswered questions into shadows that follow you long after the danger passes. A week later, the police contacted me. They had traced a signal accessing the villa's camera system from a location not far from the ridge. Not the owner's address, not anyone authorized. Someone else, someone who likely knew the layout of the property well enough to exploit the system. They hadn't caught him yet, but they suspected he had been watching the villa for months, waiting for a night when someone inside would be isolated enough for him to approach. Maybe he intended burglary, maybe something worse. They couldn't be sure. What haunted me most wasn't the chase up the stairs. It wasn't the pounding on the loft door. It was the moment earlier that evening when I'd shrugged off the flickering lights as nothing. I'd ignored the first sign. That's the thing about instincts, they whisper before they scream. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without checking every lock twice. Couldn't sit in a cafe without choosing a seat facing the entrance. Couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been chosen, not found, by accident. But as time passed, I learned to take something else from that night, something steadier than fear. I learned that safety is not guaranteed by glass walls, smart cameras, or sleek technology. Safety comes from awareness, from trusting your instincts, from understanding that complacency can be a weakness a stranger might exploit. The villa at Natfjord Ridge taught me a truth I carry with me even now. When your instincts whisper that something is wrong, listen. Fear may be uncomfortable, but ignoring it can be dangerous, and sometimes survival depends on moving the moment your heart tells you to run. Long before I ever set foot in Corfu, I believed I had a reliable instinct for danger. I grew up in a neighborhood where kids learned early to read the tone of a stranger's voice, the shift of a shadow on the sidewalk, the subtle cues that told you when to keep walking and when to run. So when the Vasilou family emailed me, asking if I could house-sit their cottage at Vathi Bay for a few days while they traveled to Athens, I didn't hesitate. I trusted my instincts, and my instincts told me this was harmless, just another quiet job that would help fund my stay in Greece. Besides, I had always imagined autumn on the islands as a peaceful escape, cool air, soft light, and empty beaches. I pictured myself reading books by the window while storms rolled gently across the water. But the moment I arrived at Seabreeze Cottage, I realized I had underestimated the isolation. The cottage perched on a rocky hillside, its white stone walls streaked from years of sea spray. Below it, Vathi Bay churned like an unsettled beast. The waves slammed the rocks so hard the windows rattled in their frames. The cats, too small, striped creatures named Cora and Spiros wove between my feet as if warning me that the place needed more than food and company. My first evening was uneventful, at least in the way that storms can feel uneventful when you convince yourself they're comforting. I listened to the wind tear through the olive trees while I unpacked my bag. The Vasilis had left a note reminding me the older cat disliked thunder. I kept the lights low, made myself tea, and settled into the sunroom with a blanket. Through the streaky glass, I could see the distant lights of fishing boats rocking in the dark. Yet even as I tried to relax, something in the atmosphere felt unsettled. A tension hung over the property, like the cottage itself had been holding its breath for too long. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue from travel. But as the storm winds howled against the stone walls, a strange unease crawled beneath my skin. I told myself I'd adapt by morning. I had no idea how wrong I was. On my second night, the storm intensified. The bay disappeared behind a curtain of rain so heavy it felt like the world existed only within the boundaries of the cottage. I spent the evening cleaning the kitchen and refilling the cat's bowls, keeping myself busy to avoid thinking about the unsettling feeling lingering in my mind since the previous night. It was while I was kneeling on the sunroom floor, shaking out a bag of kibble, that I sensed it's someone standing outside. The glass of the sunroom was covered in rain streaks that shimmered under the dim porch light. At first, I thought the movement was just the olive branches thrashing in the wind, but then the shape stilled. It was a silhouette, a distinctly human silhouette. My breath caught. I rose slowly and stepped closer to the window, wiping a patch of fog from the glass with my sleeve. That was when I saw him clearly. A gaunt man in a fisherman's sweater, soaked from the storm, staring at me with hollow, unblinking eyes. His hair clung to his face, and the shadows carved deep lines around his mouth. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch when lightning flashed behind him, illuminating the sunroom like a camera flash. I stumbled backward and nearly tripped over Spiros, who hissed so violently his fur stood on. And the man's expression didn't change. He simply shifted his focus to the latch of the sunroom door. His hand long, thin fingers that seemed too pale for someone living under the Mediterranean sun closed around the rusted metal. And then he pressed, not aggressively, not desperately, just testing, as if calculating how much pressure he'd need to break in. I wanted to call out, ask what he wanted, or shout for him to leave, but fear froze my voice. I backed away until my spine hit the wall. The man finally released the latch, let his hand fall to his side, and walked toward the grove with a slow, deliberate stride. The moment he disappeared, I locked every door and window in the cottage twice. The cats hid under the couch, trembling, and despite telling myself I would call the Vasilis in the morning, I barely slept at all that night, replaying the image of those eyes pressed against rain-soaked glass. Morning brought no relief. The storm had calmed, but the air felt just as heavy, as if the previous night had seeped into the walls. I walked down the gravel path toward the scooter I'd rented, thinking maybe a ride into town would clear my mind. But the moment I crouched to check the tires, I felt my stomach drop. Both tires were slashed neatly, cleanly, as if someone had taken a straight razor to them. Not a random act of vandalism, not something caused by debris blowing around in the storm. This was intentional. Someone wanted me stranded. I called the Vasilis immediately. When Mr. Vasilou answered, his voice was unusually tense. I explained everything: the silhouette, the man's face, the attempt to open the latch, the slashed tires. A long silence followed. I could hear faint whispering on the other end, like he was covering the phone to speak to someone. "Marco," he finally said, "there's something we should have mentioned earlier." My heart thudded. He explained that years ago, before the cottage belonged solely to their family, they had a business partner named Dorian. He helped build the property and lived there briefly. But things soured between them. Money disputes, legal threats, a bitter split. The courts eventually ruled in the Vasilis' favor, but Dorian never accepted it. And worse, he still had a spare key. We didn't think he would come back, Mr. Vasilou said softly, his voice strained with guilt. He hasn't surfaced in years. We thought it was safe. Their reassurance felt thin, stretched to its breaking point. I asked if they could return early, but they hesitated, explaining they were tied up with medical appointments in Athens. They promised to send a relative to check on me the next day. The next day felt like a lifetime away. That afternoon, the sky stayed eerily still. No wind, no waves, just silence, broken only by the occasional crack of olive branches shifting in ways that didn't seem entirely natural. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned toward the grove, I thought I saw movement, a figure slipping behind a tree, a shadow ducking out of view, and even though daylight lingered, I locked the doors again. Something in the air whispered that nightfall would bring far worse. By twilight, the cottage had transformed into a place of tension, so thick I could barely breathe. The cats refused to enter the sunroom. They lingered in the hallway, ears flat, staring into corners as if listening to sounds I couldn't hear. I tried turning on music to break the silence, but even familiar songs seemed out of place, swallowed by the uneasy atmosphere. As darkness settled over Vathi Bay, I checked every door again. Then I checked them a second time. The windows, the back entrance, the kitchen hatch. I kept imagining the gaunt man, slipping in through some hidden entry he knew and I didn't. Dorian had lived here. He knew the property better than anyone. I had just finished securing the last window when I heard a slow, deliberate crunch of gravel. Outside the kitchen, I froze. The cottage was built on a slope, and the gravel path that ran alongside it wasn't used by tourists or locals. The only people who ever walked that path were the Vassilou family, and whoever had stood outside the sunroom the night before. I turned off the lights and crouched behind the kitchen counter, listening. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, this time closer. Someone brushed against the exterior wall. A shadow passed over the kitchen window, faint but unmistakable. The doorknob rattled slowly, softly, as if the person wanted to test whether I had locked it without alerting me. The cats bolted into the bedroom. I held my breath as the rattling stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came the faintest scrape metal against metal. I realized in horror that someone was trying to fit a key into the lock. I lunged toward the door and braced my weight against it, heart pounding. The key scraped again, but the old metal mechanism caught just enough to prevent it from turning. A low exhale came from the other side, frustrated, almost amused. He knew I was there. The key withdrew. Slow footsteps retreated along the gravel path until they faded into nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the living room couch with every light on, gripping the fireplace, poker like a lifeline. Each time a branch scraped against the roof, I jerked upright. I couldn't shake the certainty that Dorian wasn't finished yet, not even close. When dawn broke at last, pale light seeping across the bay, I felt like I had survived a war I hadn't agreed to fight. I paced the cottage, waiting for the Vassilis' relative to arrive, rehearsing how I'd explain everything without sounding unhinged. The cats stuck close, their nervous energy matching mine. 2 hours passed, then 3. No car, no visitor. The cottage remained silent except for the steady crash of waves returning as the storm clouds drifted away. Finally, I made up my mind I wasn't waiting anymore. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with essentials, and left every light on as I stepped outside. The air smelled sharp with sea salt and damp earth. I scanned the olive grove, half expecting to see Dorian watching from behind a tree. The path toward the main road twisted down the hillside. My heart hammered as I walked, each step faster than the one before. Halfway down, I heard branches crack above me. I didn't look. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached the small cafe at the edge of Kalami village. I burst through the door, breathless, startling the owner and 2 elderly men drinking coffee. The owner, a woman named Eleni, recognized the panic in my expression instantly. I told her everything, voice shaking. Without hesitation, she locked the cafe door and called the island police. Within 20 minutes, officers arrived and drove back up to the cottage with me. They searched the property thoroughly but found no sign of Dorian, just footprints in the mud near the kitchen door and the deep indentations of someone standing for a long time outside the sunroom window. The officers exchanged grim glances but said little. I left that day. I didn't return for my belongings until the Vassilis came back weeks later. Even now, months after escaping Vathi Bay, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night certain that someone is standing outside my window, watching. Those hollow eyes linger in my memory, like a warning carved into glass, and I've learned this. Instincts aren't flawless, but they sharpen when you finally listen. When something feels wrong, trust your intuition. Fear is often the mind's earliest warning, and ignoring it can lead you into dangers you never imagined. I never imagined that agreeing to house-sit my cousin's apartment in Prague would change the way I viewed solitude forever. I arrived in the off-season, early winter, when the cobblestone streets of Old Town were nearly deserted, wrapped in a quiet fog that softened the sound of footsteps and made the city feel like it belonged to a secret few. The Svatovatlavska residence was elegant, deceptively serene, a stone facade that had seen centuries pass, polished brass, railings, and a balcony overlooking a narrow courtyard where the light bent strangely around walls and corners. My cousins had described it as peaceful, a perfect place for me to finish editing the chapters of my book, away from the distractions of home. I had expected peace, but what I found was something far more unsettling. The apartment itself was immaculate. Minimalist furnishings, pale hardwood floors, and large windows that let in the gray winter light gave it a quiet elegance. I set my suitcase down and began unpacking slowly, breathing in the faint smell of cedar polish, mixed with a subtle, older scent that hinted at the lives lived before mine. As I filled the kettle and made myself a cup of tea that evening, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the ceiling. At first, I laughed, nervously, blaming it on pipes or the building settling, but the sound was too precise. 3 slow taps, a short pause, then 2 more. The pattern repeated intermittently, like someone attempting to communicate, not startle. Curious and a little unnerved, I went onto the balcony to gather my thoughts. There, across the courtyard, I noticed them. An elderly couple framed by their window, pale faces partially obscured by sheer curtains. They didn't move, didn't turn away. Their gaze was steady, almost chilling in its intensity. I waved instinctively. No response. The silence pressed in around me, dense and unfamiliar. I shut the balcony door quickly, my hands shaking slightly, and tried to settle in. But every time I heard a distant creak or a soft tap, I felt eyes on me. That night, the apartment felt too large for one person. The shadows stretched unnaturally, and the rhythmic tapping from above seemed to punctuate every thought I tried to focus on. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the feeling that I was being watched, that the silence itself had weight. In the darkness, I realized how fragile the boundary between solitude and isolation could be. Peace and stillness can feel liberating, but when combined with the unknown, they can start to feel like a trap. Even something as ordinary as a sound from the ceiling, or a pair of eyes across a courtyard, can unravel the comfort you thought you had. The first night taught me a lesson I hadn't anticipated, that the ordinary, the calm, can hide intentions you aren't ready to face. The following morning, I tried to re-establish normalcy. I walked through the quiet streets of Old Town to buy groceries, enjoying the nearly empty alleys and the pale sunlight hitting the tops of the buildings. Returning to the apartment, however, I immediately sensed that something had changed. The balcony door was slightly ajar. I froze mid-step, staring at the thin wedge of cold air curling into the living room. I had locked it that morning, perfectly certain of it. Heart pounding, I pushed it closed, jiggled the lock, and checked again. Nothing was stolen, nothing moved, but the air carried a subtle disturbance, a feeling of intrusion that made my chest tighten. That evening, the tapping began again. This time, it was louder, more deliberate, coming in intervals that suggested communication, not coincidence. I tried to convince myself it was the building settling, or maybe some mechanical issue, but it was impossible to ignore. I even knocked back, half in jest, half in fear, 3 times, and waited. Silence followed. 15 minutes later, it resumed. Curiosity and fear drew me to the balcony again. The elderly couple was there, framed by their curtained window, unmoving. I waved, trying to engage them, almost joking. "Do you always watch from here?" They didn't respond, They simply stared, patient and unyielding. Their gaze wasn't casual. It felt deliberate, as if they had memorized every movement I had made since arriving. Inside, I tried to distract myself. I opened my laptop, attempted to read, but my eyes kept darting toward the ceiling and the hallway. Each tap echoed in my mind, creating a rhythm I couldn't shake. Even routine tasks felt weighed down by anticipation, by the sense of being observed. The apartment's elegance now felt like a mask. The calm I expected had shifted into a tension I couldn't define. It struck me then that solitude and peace are different things. Solitude can be comforting, an opportunity to reflect. But when that solitude is punctuated by observation, by a presence you cannot see but know exists, it becomes disorienting, oppressive. I realized I wasn't just alone in the apartment. I was in someone else's awareness. My movements, my routines, even my most mundane tasks were being noted. The small, polite taps above the ceiling were no longer ambient noise, they were signals. By the end of that day, I understood I couldn't ignore what was happening. The feeling of being watched was not imaginary. It had intent, it had pattern, and it had waited for me to notice. By the third day, the apartment no longer felt like a temporary home. It felt like a stage, and I was the only actor unaware of the audience. I needed a break from the oppressive feeling inside, so I packed my laptop and notebooks and walked to a small cafe near the river. I managed 2 hours of focused work, my mind finally settling into a rhythm, until my phone buzzed violently with 3 motion alerts in rapid succession. Motion detected in the living room, motion detected in the hallway, motion detected again in the living room. My stomach dropped. I had been gone for barely 20 minutes. I left my coffee half finished and sprinted out of the cafe, weaving through the narrow streets until I reached the residence. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. The kitchen was untouched, the entryway clean. But the moment I stepped into the living room, I knew. The cushions on the couch were slightly different, arranged neatly but with a subtle indentation, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting. A cold wave moved through me. I checked the windows, the balcony door, the closets, every corner. That was when I noticed a faint, unnatural glint on the ceiling. The smoke detector's lens reflected the light in a way I'd never seen. I climbed onto a chair and peered closer. There, hidden inside the detector, was a tiny sightline, a pinhole camera, almost invisible. Once you notice one thing out of place, your eyes start searching for more. I checked the detector in the hallway. Another glint, another pinhole. The one in the bedroom, same thing. My breath shortened. Someone had placed these intentionally. Someone wanted to see everything I did. My phone nearly slipped out of my hands as I called the police. The officers arrived quickly, a pair of calm men with serious expressions. They examined each device, confirming they were installed carefully, professionally, placed to surveil private spaces. They asked me if anyone might have access, neighbors, workers, even family. I mentioned the elderly couple across the courtyard, the way they watched, their presence at the window each night. The officers exchanged a glance, unspoken but telling. They'd heard something similar before. Then one of them asked a question that tied everything into a silent knot in my chest. Did you know your cousin's apartment originally came with 2 spare keys? I blinked. No. They only gave me one. The others were never returned. I didn't need to say it aloud. We both knew who might have them. As the officers packed up the cameras as evidence, the tapping began again from the ceiling. Faint, measured, intentional. The officer looked up. That isn't pipes. No, it wasn't. It was a warning, or a message, and someone wanted me to hear it. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old radiator, every soft shift of the floorboards made my body tense. I left every light on like I could somehow scare away whoever was behind the ceiling, tapping, or the cameras. But the silence was heavier than noise, pressing against the walls like something alive. The next morning, the police returned with updates. The elderly couple had answered their questions, but their story didn't fit together neatly. They claimed the spare key was given to them by a former tenant, though they couldn't remember a name or even a year. Their apartment, the police added, Had a laptop set up with multiple video feeds, including several from cameras. Inside the residence, I felt physically sick, like the room tilted beneath me. I imagined them sitting in their dim, fog-framed window, watching me boil water, fold laundry, sleep, watching me without blinking. The officers suggested I pack and stay somewhere else until the investigation concluded. I didn't argue. I grabbed my suitcase and piled my belongings inside without folding them. I just wanted out. My fingers fumbled over the zipper, trembling so hard that I almost broke the pull tab. As I dragged my luggage toward the door, the tapping returned, softer than before, almost coaxing. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, a rhythm I had come to dread. It felt like someone on the other side of the ceiling was acknowledging my departure. I stepped onto the balcony one last time, intending to check the lock. The cold air slapped my face, sharp enough to sting. When I looked across the courtyard, my breath caught. The couple was standing at their window again, watching me, unmoving, expressionless. Their eyes followed my movements, mirroring my steps as if tracing them onto invisible paper. The curtains behind them rustled slightly, but no wind moved through the courtyard. Something was wrong about that motion, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The woman's lips parted, just barely, like she was about to say something, but she didn't. She simply stared, mouth open in a silent, breathless shape. I stepped backward, my heart racing as if trying to outrun my body. In that moment, everything clicked into a terrifying clarity. The tapping, the unlocked door, the rearranged cushions, the cameras. These weren't random events. They weren't coincidences. They were tests, observations, steps in a pattern I didn't understand. And the couple was waiting for what? I didn't want to find out. I shut the balcony door and didn't look back. I moved into a small hotel a few blocks away, one of those narrow, warm places with thick blankets and friendly staff who didn't ask questions. But even there, I checked the locks twice, drew the curtains tightly, and turned my phone face down every night. The feeling of being watched doesn't vanish just because distance exists. It lingers in the nerves, in the corners of the mind. Over the next week, the investigation wrapped up. The cameras were traced back to an online purchase made using a payment method associated with the elderly couple. Their apartment contained equipment for monitoring feeds, old notebooks with strange timed entries, and a few sketches of the courtyard's layout from multiple angles. What startled the police and me most was the depth of their involvement. It wasn't a one-time intrusion. It had been happening for years, slowly, quietly, watching previous tenants, mapping routines, tracking movements, not to physically harm anyone, but to collect them, to observe them like specimens under glass. Before leaving Prague, I returned once to the residence with an officer to finalize documentation. The courtyard was wrapped in a thick morning fog, swirling like breath held too long. The couple's apartment window was dark now, sealed by the authorities, curtains drawn, tight. But as I crossed the courtyard, dragging my fingertips along the cold stone wall, a faint tapping echoed from somewhere above the old archway. A subtle, deliberate sound. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. My breath froze in my chest. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. Sometimes things are explanations, sometimes they aren't. And sometimes, when the world grows too quiet, it whispers back. Even after I returned home, I woke some nights with the sensation of eyes on me, the memory of fog wrapped around stone, and the faint echo of tapping from somewhere deep in the walls of my mind. The experience changed something in me, taught me that isolation doesn't always bring clarity. It can bring shadows, movement in places you don't expect, presences that thrive in the quiet. Solitude had felt like a gift when I first arrived in Prague. By the time I left, it felt like a warning. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The smallest sign, a sound, a glance, a shifting object can be the truth, trying to protect you before danger reveals itself. I remember the first time I saw Hawthorne Terrace. The street sloped gently toward the harbor in Leith, lined with old Victorian townhouses that had seen better centuries. I had taken the house-sitting job mostly for the rent-free perk and the promise of a quiet week in Edinburgh, hoping to catch up on work and perhaps finally finish my half-written novel. I hadn't expected charm. I certainly hadn't expected the house to feel alive in the way it did. Its tall, arched, windows reflected the gray sky like somber eyes, and the front door creaked with a long, low moan whenever the wind pushed against it. The homeowners were a quiet couple, in their 60s, who left instructions in careful handwriting. "The house is old, it's creaky, just let it be." I laughed to myself, thinking of how cliché that sounded. Old house, spooky noises, winds rattling the shutters, but the truth is, there was something grounding about it too. The kind of charm that made you want to curl up, with a book in a high-backed chair by the fireplace. I spent the first evening unpacking in the master bedroom, opening windows to let the damp, spring air drift in. The study, my temporary office, was lined with shelves, stuffed with maritime, books, maps, and journals that smelled faintly of dust and ink. I ran my fingers along their spines and felt a strange sense of connection, as if the house itself was encouraging me to settle in. The floors groaned under my steps, the radiators hissed to life, and somewhere in the back of the house, a draft whispered through a narrow hallway. I shrugged it off. That first night, the wind pressed against the walls like a gentle hand. It was only when I was preparing for bed that I noticed it, a subtle metallic vibration from the study's wall panel. I placed my hand on it, curious, and felt nothing substantial, just a thin, almost imperceptible quiver. My imagination, I reasoned, probably magnified the sensation. Victorian houses had their quirks. By the second night, though, it became harder to rationalize. As I worked late, writing emails, and making notes in my journal, I saw the faintest flicker of light seeping from the panel's edges, almost like a flashlight peering out from within. My first thought was reflection from the streetlights below, but the alley behind the house was empty, silent. A chill crawled up my spine, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of the floorboards under your feet and the air brushing against your neck. I told myself firmly, it's nothing, just the house settling. But houses like this, I would soon learn, have a way of hiding their truths. Sleep was restless that night. I kept dreaming of narrow spaces, walls closing in on me, and a pair of calm, unblinking eyes observing me from the dark. I tried to laugh it off over breakfast, chatting with the couple via text to confirm the house's quirks. They reassured me with gentle humor. Old houses have memories, Leo. You just have to live with them. By the third night, the disturbances escalated. Walking past the study, I could hear a slow, dragging sound, like something scraping behind the walls. I froze mid-step several times, straining my ears, listening for rhythm or intent. The sound paused whenever I paused, resumed whenever I moved. My rational mind suggested loose pipes, rodents, maybe a misaligned floorboard. My gut said otherwise. I started testing the panels with my hand, knocking gently, listening for hollows. One corner in particular seemed different. The faintest vibration ran through my knuckles when I pressed it. I felt a strange compulsion to investigate further, though a part of me screamed to walk away. That night, I sat in the study for hours, eyes fixed on the panel, notebook in lap, pen hovering as if I might write the intruder's story before meeting him. It was during one of these long hours that I heard the faintest whisper of movement, a careful shuffle, deliberate but soft. My heart raced. I took a slow step back, then forward again, holding my breath. The dragging noise stopped, then started again. I realized, suddenly and horrifyingly, that it followed my every movement. The decision came quietly, without bravado. I would pry the panel. I found a letter opener in the desk drawer, slid it into the tiny gap, and gently lifted. What came next would haunt me forever. The first thing that hit me was the smell, damp, unwashed, sour with stale food and clothes. My stomach turned, and then I saw him, a man, ragged, pale, and impossibly thin, standing in the narrow cavity behind the wall. His eyes were calm, almost eerily serene, fixed on me with a strange intensity. He did not scream. He did not move toward me. He only raised a finger to his lips. Silence, he demanded. The gesture alone carried weight. It was clear he had lived here for weeks, perhaps months, carefully hidden from the world. The floor of his cramped space was layered with discarded food tins, blankets, and scraps. There was no malice in him, only survival instinct, a Strange domesticity adapted to the walls. I swallowed hard. You? How? Why are you here? My voice trembled. He shook his head slightly, gesturing to the piles, then to himself. Words were unnecessary. The reality was stark. Someone had chosen this hidden existence, and I had stumbled into it. My first instinct was fear. My second was empathy. Somewhere in his eyes, I saw a human being, fragile and desperate, but living in a world entirely apart from mine. I backed away, hands raised. I'm calling the police. You need help. He did not resist. He merely nodded, as if he had expected this day to come, had always planned for it. When the officers arrived, the extent of his hidden life unfolded. A makeshift nest, careful notes cataloging everything he had observed, including me reading in the study. He had watched from inches away, patiently, without harm, waiting for a moment to exit undetected. The police were calm but somber. He's lucky to be alive, one officer murmured, and so are you. Even after the man was removed, the house felt different. The walls seemed thinner, the silence heavier. Every creak and draft reminded me that someone had been watching, living in spaces I had never noticed, turning the house into a place of dual existence, one visible, one hidden. I avoided the study for days. Eventually, I returned, but the comfort of the books, the maps, and the quiet was replaced by a sense of trespass, mine and his. I found myself talking aloud, sometimes, as if to assure the walls that I meant no harm, that the study was mine only, temporarily. The homeowners returned days later. I tried to explain what happened, my words fumbling, inadequate, yet their calm acceptance grounded me. Old houses keep secrets, they said, again. It's not the first time, maybe not the last. I left Hawthorne Terrace with a new awareness of human fragility and resilience. The man behind the walls had survived by patience, cunning, and quiet observation. His presence was a reminder that people exist in hidden corners of the world, often unseen, but enduring. Nonetheless, months later, I still dream of narrow cavities and unblinking eyes. Writing in a quiet room, I sometimes feel the weight of invisible observers. And I smile at the memory, oddly grateful. What frightened me most, the idea of being watched, of someone existing unnoticed also, taught me empathy in its rawest form. I realized the world is filled with unseen struggles, hidden lives, and silent endurance. Fear is natural, but compassion is stronger. The man behind the walls could have been danger. He could have been violence incarnate. Instead, he was human, frail, desperate, resourceful, and surviving. I left Edinburgh changed. I no longer ignore the quiet corners of life. I listen more, I notice more, and I remember that every person, every hidden life is deserving of understanding, not judgment. Appearances deceive, fear often exaggerates, and empathy can bridge the distance between the seen and the unseen. Sometimes, the walls around us are not barriers but shields for those who need them most. I had always believed solitude was a luxury, something rare, something I deserved. When I first received the offer to house-sit the Edelweiss Ridge Chalet in the Swiss Alps, my heart had leapt with anticipation. The idea was intoxicating, a remote timber lodge perched on the edge of Verbier Highlands, flanked by dense forests and frozen rivers, far from the hum of civilization. The owners, academics in their late 40s, had been insistent that their two street Bernards, Bruno and Greta, would keep me company, that I should enjoy the quiet while they lectured overseas. It sounded perfect. The journey to the chalet was longer and colder than I imagined. My rental car struggled through roads buried under thick snow, tires crunching on ice. I remembered the first glimpse of the chalet, rising like a fairy tale fortress, its wooden beams dusted with frost, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. I shook off the cold, trying to picture evenings spent by the fire, reading and sketching, Bruno and Greta snoozing at my feet. The first night, though, was unsettling. The dogs, normally calm and affectionate, refused to settle, their massive heads tilting toward corners of the living room where nothing stirred. Every snap of a branch outside made them growl low in their throats. I convinced myself it was the wind, the isolation, anything but the sense that I was not alone. By the third evening, the sounds began. At first, subtle creaks, soft thuds, but gradually, a heavy rhythm emerged from the attic, like footsteps dragging something across the floor. I tried to call the owners, but each time they brushed off my questions. "It's an old chalet," the woman said finally, her voice tight. "Nothing to worry about." There was a hesitation I couldn't ignore. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Houses make noises, dogs hear things we don't. I stared out the window at the thick snowfall, the world reduced to white and shadow. Bruno's growl snapped me back when the attic sounded again, deliberate, almost impatient. I sat frozen, notebook in hand, wondering what had drawn me so far from safety. That night, I finally slept, but only lightly, each shadow a suspicion, each draft a warning. The next morning, the unease deepened. I had cleaned the chalet's living areas and tried to organize the attic when something small caught my eye. A child's drawing, tucked inside a locked desk drawer I hadn't touched, depicting a steep ravine with a tiny figure at the bottom. Shakily, a name was written in the corner, Lena. I froze. I hadn't expected anyone else to be in the house. "Bruno, Greta, did you see this?" I whispered, holding the paper out to them. They sniffed and nudged my hand, as if approving caution. It was strange, the way they seemed alert only around the hot tub room. That evening, their unease became tangible. They circled it incessantly, barking low, their breath fogging the cold tiles. And then I saw them, faint, wet footprints, small and childlike, glimmering on the floor, doors locked from the inside. I called the owners again, my hands shaking. It's probably water from melting snow," the man said, dismissively. But I caught the quiver in his voice, and it made my chest tighten. I ended the call, gripping the sketch, staring at the fireplace, and suddenly the silence of the chalet felt heavy, like it had weight. I realized I wasn't just isolated, I was being watched, in the way I couldn't understand. That night, lying in bed, I heard whispers threading through the vents. My name, delicate and fractured, floated on the air. "Sophia." I bolted upright, pulse hammering. Bruno and Greta barked in tandem, rushing to the hall. I followed them, only to find empty corridors. The whispers faded when I approached, but the cold lingered, pressing against my skin like icy fingers. Sleep became impossible. Each sound, each thump above, each draft made me flinch. I felt eyes on me, felt the presence of someone or something both tiny and profoundly sorrowful, and I realized, with a chill, that the child in the drawing was not imaginary. Lena had been here, and she was not gone. By the third day, the chalet had become a labyrinth of fear. I avoided the attic entirely, but the noises found their way to me. At mealtimes, I sat in the kitchen, eyes darting toward corners, ears straining. Bruno and Greta no longer slept. They paced, their massive bodies tense, as if trying to understand something I couldn't. One evening, while boiling water, I noticed the attic ladder's hatch was slightly ajar. I froze. That handprint, small and dusty, rested on the wood. It wasn't a mark left long ago, it was recent. I held my breath, suddenly aware that I had been sharing space with someone unseen. The air grew colder with each hour. A draft spiraled down the hallway, carrying the faint sound of sobbing, high-pitched and desperate. I tried to call out, "Lena, are you here?" My voice echoed, strangely in the wood-paneled hall. No response, just the soft echo of tears in the wind. Outside, I began to speak to the dogs, the only tangible companions I had. "We need to leave. Now." Bruno barked sharply, Greta growling, but there was a hesitancy, a sorrow in their behavior. They seemed to recognize the tragedy. The grief of whoever or whatever lurked in the chalet. That night, I refused to sleep upstairs. I made a bed in the living room, stacked blankets high, and there, in the dark, I thought I saw her, a shadowy figure peeking from the staircase, just long enough for me to glimpse a small, pale face, hair matted, and eyes wide with unspoken fear. My heart froze. I whispered, "I won't hurt you." The shadow vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence of the mountains. By morning, I had decided I was leaving. The snowfall had intensified, windows frosted over, and the road back was treacherous. I packed quietly, shaking, trying not to wake the restless dogs. A faint, sorrowful hum trailed me everywhere, soft but unmistakable. It wasn't malicious, it was seeking acknowledgement. I climbed the attic ladder one last time. The handprints were still there, pressed into the dust, and I realized she had tried to make herself visible. To reach out, I touched them gently, feeling the cold dust cling to my fingers. "I see you, Lena," I whispered. It felt absurd, talking to a ghost, yet necessary. Bruno and Greta nudged me toward the door. We stepped into the pre-dawn storm, snow biting, my face, wind howling around the ridge. I glanced back once. The chalet stood silent, its smoke curling like a sigh. And for a moment, I swore I saw a small figure in the window, watching, before it disappeared. The drive down was treacherous, visibility near zero. I wrapped the sketch in my coat and held it, close, determined to remember. Even when I reached civilization, the sense of her presence lingered. That tiny voice echoed in my dreams, in the rustle of the trees, in every quiet room I entered. Weeks later, the memory of Edelweiss Ridge haunted me like a melody I couldn't forget. I told a friend about it once, expecting laughter, skepticism, but she only listened, eyes wide. She didn't need convincing. I had changed. Isolation, I realized, wasn't just a chance to rest, it was a lens through which the unseen could speak. The chalet had taught me something I hadn't anticipated. Grief and loss linger, sometimes long, after life ends. Lena had not been cruel, only forgotten, lost, seeking acknowledgement in the way she could. And in seeing her, hearing her, I had honored that small, persistent presence. Even now, when I sit quietly in my apartment, I sometimes hear a whisper threading through the silence. It's not frightening, not angry, just a reminder that those who go unnoticed still wish to be seen. Sometimes the world asks us to bear witness to the unseen, to listen when others cannot. Compassion isn't just for the living, it is for memory, for loss, for the souls who linger in places we cannot fully explain. I never expected a cabin in the Black Forest to feel like an escape from the world, but when I drove up the winding road toward Ebenholt's cabin, I understood why. The trees towered above, the gravel path, ancient pines casting long shadows even in the fading afternoon light. The air smelled like earth and wood, crisp and almost medicinal, and the silence was so profound it pressed against my ears. I had volunteered to house sit for a friend of a friend, partly for the solitude, partly because my life in the city felt suffocating. The constant hum of traffic, the endless notifications, the faces, oh, so many faces, it had all started to wear me down. The cabin itself was modest but sturdy, built of dark timber that blended seamlessly into the surrounding forest. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly of cedar and old books. A small terrier named Fritz trotted to greet me, his tail wagging uncertainly. He seemed calm enough, but there was an intensity in his eyes I didn't notice at first. He sniffed the corners of the rooms, paused at the windows, and every so often, he would fixate on the front door. Ears perked. I spent my first evening unpacking, making tea, and listening to the forest breathe around me. The sun dipped behind the mountains, and long shadows filled the cabin. For a moment, it was perfect. No deadlines, no traffic, no obligations, just me, Fritz, and the smell of pine. Yet as night fell, I realized that even in complete isolation, there was a presence to the place. The cabin had a history, a weight, and I felt it in the way the floorboards creaked slightly, the way the wind rattled the shutters. It was almost as if the house was alive, aware of its new guest. I brushed off the unease and told myself it was just imagination. I wasn't afraid, I was curious. By the second night, Fritz's behavior became stranger. He would stare at the door for long stretches, growling low in his throat when there was nothing there. I laughed it off nervously, convincing myself that he was just a protective dog. The forest, I thought, had its own rhythm, its own rules, and perhaps I simply wasn't attuned to them yet. But on the third night, the forest's rhythm changed. I was making tea when I heard gravel crunch. Outside, slow, deliberate steps. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then, as I stepped toward the window, I froze. There was a man standing in my living room. Tall, plain work clothes, calm, posture, hands at his sides. He didn't move violently or rush. He simply existed there, in a way that made me feel like I had crossed into his space rather than the other way around. I swear my heartbeat made my ears ring. My mouth went dry, and I couldn't speak. The man's expression was unreadable, almost casual, like he had expected me all along. He spoke in precise, gentle German. "Open the safe. Leave. Now. No questions." My mind scrambled. There was no forced entry, no sign of a break-in. The cabin was old, the door unlocked by design. Somehow, he had walked in, but not as an intruder. He moved like the house itself had admitted him. Who are you?" I managed to choke out, though my voice felt foreign even to me. He tilted his head slightly. "You are trespassing. This cabin is not yours tonight. Only leave. Do as I say." I stumbled backward toward the kitchen, looking for anything to defend myself. Fritz, who had been quiet at first, suddenly erupted in barking, snapping at the man's ankles. It was chaotic, enough that I didn't stop to question it. I ran through the back door, the cool night air hitting me like a wall, and into the dark forest beyond. Branches whipped my arms, roots snagged my shoes, yet the man did not follow. His footsteps were absent, as if he had never intended to chase me. I didn't stop until I stumbled into a small clearing, chest heaving, heart racing like a drum. The forest seemed to swallow the sound of my panic. Eventually, I found a road and waited until a passing car could take me to the nearest town. Police arrived the next morning after I reported the incident. They searched the cabin, questioned me thoroughly, but found nothing. The safe was untouched. The doors and windows showed no signs of force, no fingerprints anywhere. I tried to make sense of it. Squatter? Impossible. Burglary? Unlikely. The calmness of the man, the absence of theft, the lack of pursuit, nothing fit. It felt less like a crime and more like an intrusion into someone else's domain. Fritz, I noticed, remained tense long after I left the cabin. He had sensed something I hadn't yet comprehended. Back in the city, the memory of that tall man lingered like a shadow. Even in crowded streets, I could feel the quiet weight of the forest and the cabin. Whoever or whatever had claimed that space, it was theirs. I realized I had been an outsider in a place that did not belong to me. In the following weeks, I tried to distract myself. Work, friends, the endless noise of the city, but it was futile. The memory of the cabin haunted me. I started researching the property, hoping to find some mundane explanation. There were no previous reports of break-ins, no tales of squatters. The owner, an elderly man named Herr Winter, insisted he had never experienced anything like what I described. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty that the man I saw wasn't an intruder at all. I returned once, for closure more than curiosity, driving through the thick forest that now seemed, to me, a living maze. The cabin looked empty and ordinary, the pine needles glittering in the morning sun. Yet as I approached, I saw something, a faint outline of a figure through the frosted glass. Not threatening, not aggressive, just standing there as if waiting. I froze. My rational mind screamed that it was a trick of the light, that shadows play in strange ways, but my instinct screamed otherwise. I spoke softly, almost to myself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. I waited, unsure what I expected. Minutes passed. Then, the outline vanished. The cabin returned to its silent vigil over the forest. Driving away, I felt an odd mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I had seen nothing threatening. Sadness that the forest and its cabin had claimed someone or something before I ever arrived. Perhaps some spaces are never ours, no matter how long we occupy them. Perhaps the world has corners reserved for ghosts, for memories, for presences we cannot rationalize. Months later, I recounted the story to a friend over drinks. He laughed, but not unkindly. "Maybe the forest just doesn't like strangers," he said. I nodded, but I knew it was more than that. It wasn't about dislike. It was about ownership, about a quiet right that precedes human logic. Some places have guardians, unseen or otherwise, who ensure that peace remains unbroken. I began to reflect on my own life. In the city, I claimed spaces constantly, apartments, desks, coffee shops, even social circles, but had I ever respected them? Had I ever approached life with the humility the forest demanded? The cabin had taught me something subtle but profound. Intrusion isn't always visible. Sometimes, the harm comes simply from presence. I also thought about Fritz, the terrier. His instinct had been perfect. Animals sense things we overlook. He had known, without a doubt, that the cabin was already claimed. My city-trained mind doubted him, yet I survived only because he reacted instinctively. I began to appreciate the lessons small things teach us, the ones we tend to ignore in favor of rational explanations. Nightmares visited me occasionally, but not of the man himself. They were of the forest, of lines I shouldn't cross, of silence too deep to break. I began writing down my experiences, trying to capture the feeling without rationalizing it. Stories, I realized, could preserve wisdom that logic cannot. Years later, I returned to Germany on a different assignment, avoiding the cabin deliberately. Yet, in my dreams, the Ebenholz cabin remained vivid. The smell of pine, the weight of silence, the calm authority of someone who had claimed it long before me. I learned that respect isn't merely courteous, it is survival. Respect for others' space, for boundaries we cannot see, for forces we cannot explain. The cabin stayed in my memory not as a terror but as a lesson. Life isn't about conquering every corner, claiming every space, or bending the world to our will. Sometimes, wisdom lies in noticing what is not ours, what never will be, and stepping back gracefully. Some spaces, and some moments, are sacred in ways we cannot measure. True courage is knowing when to leave, when to respect, and when to said. Listen to the forest, to instinct, and to the quiet voices that guide us beyond fear. I didn't think twice when I agreed to house sit Cypress Crest. It was a sun-drenched mid-century house perched on a quiet ridge in Riviera Heights, Santa Barbara. The ocean sparkled below, like a vast silver mirror, and the air smelled faintly of salt and lemons from the grove just beyond. The terrace. I liked bright, open spaces. I liked sunlight spilling across polished wood floors. I told myself it was just a summer job, a simple distraction from my restless city life. From the moment I walked through the door, the house felt oddly alive. Not in a spooky way, the warmth of the wooden furniture, the faint scent of cedar in the study, and the soft echo of my footsteps made it feel more like a friend than a building. I unpacked quickly, humming to myself as I set up the small office area in the guest bedroom. The owners, an elderly couple named the Harpers, had left strict instructions. Water the lemon trees, don't leave the windows, open at night, and answer the phone only if you must. I nodded, thinking the last rule unnecessary. By late afternoon, I wandered into the study, a spacious room with towering shelves of books and a massive mahogany desk. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting patterns of gold across the Persian rug. I ran my fingers over the spines of books and picked up a fountain pen, twirling it absently between my fingers. This place is perfect, I muttered to myself. I spent the evening on the terrace, a glass of wine in hand, listening to the gulls and the distant crashing of waves. As the sky deepened into shades of pink and violet, I thought about how peaceful it felt here, how utterly harmless it seemed. That night, I went to bed early, lulled by the soft rhythm of the sea. I didn't know the house had a heartbeat that only revealed itself after dark. At exactly midnight, the phone rang. I froze, half asleep, staring at the vintage landline in the corner of the room. The shrill tone cut through the silence like a knife. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. Nothing. Just a faint, distorted hiss, like static from an old radio. I blinked, convinced I'd imagined it. When I hung up, the silence returned, thick and almost palpable. I unplugged the phone from the wall, thinking that would be the end of it. I didn't sleep well that night. By morning, I was already questioning my judgment, but the house was bright again, cheerful, even, as if it had forgotten its nocturnal mischief. I told myself it was a one-off, a prank maybe, or the phone line acting up. I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The next night, I was more cautious. I kept the phone unplugged, yet at exactly midnight, I heard it, the shrill ring, this time coming from the study itself. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I approached slowly, as if my caution alone could keep whatever was there at bay. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. No answer, just that same distorted hiss, faint and mocking. My hand shook as I reached for the phone, wanting to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. But the moment I touched it, the sound ceased. I stood in the middle of the study, listening to the house settle around me, the faint creak of the wood floors, the sigh of the wind through the lemon trees, but nothing else. I tried to convince myself it was just the house, natural creaking, my imagination, but a sense of unease had already rooted itself in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was aware of me, studying me as I studied it. By the third night, things took a darker turn. At midnight, the phone rang again, and I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. A sound came through that made my blood run cold. It was my own laughter, distorted, slowed, warped into something sinister. I stumbled back, bumping into the edge of the desk. My mind raced. Someone had recorded me. But who? And why? Hours later, a voicemail appeared on the answering machine, slow, deliberate breathing, followed by a whisper. "I'm already in the study." My throat tightened as I stood frozen outside the study door. I noticed the curtains swaying despite the windows being locked. A faint scent of cologne lingering in the air. I could barely breathe. The house had crossed some invisible boundary between ordinary space and threat. By dawn, I had made the first of many calls to the police, to the Harpers, to anyone who could help. They arrived quickly, taking statements, inspecting windows and doors. They found a forced latch on a side window, but no one inside. Just the faint smell of someone who shouldn't have been there. I left the house that morning with my bag in a daze, the study door closing behind me with an echo that seemed almost deliberate. Even after I left, the feeling followed me. My apartment in the city felt different, the shadows deeper, the silence too heavy. Nights were worse. At exactly midnight, my phone would glitch, the screen lighting up with a blank caller ID, a faint hiss lingering in the background, like the house was speaking to me through miles of wire. I spoke to a friend, someone rational, someone who would tell me I was overreacting. "It's just your nerves," she said. "You were alone in an old house, that's all." But she didn't understand. The sound was specific, intimate. It mimicked my voice, my laughter, my presence. It wasn't just a prank. I replayed every moment in the study in my mind, the way the curtains moved, the scent of the cologne, the faint creak beneath the desk. The more I remembered, the more I realized the calls weren't random. They were anticipatory, predictive even, as if the house or someone in it knew exactly where I would be, what I would do. I avoided house-sitting jobs after that, fearful of even the thought of an empty, quiet space. I couldn't walk past studies in open houses without feeling my skin crawl. The boundary between house and intruder had blurred, leaving me perpetually on edge. Every shadow, every creak, every unexpected noise became a potential threat. Weeks later, I called the police again, desperate for closure, but there was nothing more they could do. No fingerprints, no DNA, no leads. Only the memory, the calls, and the whispers that seemed permanently etched into my consciousness. Eventually, I sought therapy to deal with the anxiety that had taken hold. Talking helped, but it couldn't erase the memory of being observed, of hearing my own voice used against me. I realized something unsettling. The study had become more than a room. It had become a presence, a sentient space that remembered, echoed, and waited. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps the intruder had been clever, using technology to simulate my own voice. But even that explanation failed to soothe the primal unease that gripped me. There was something unnerving about the way the house seemed to respond to me, as if it had adapted to my movements, my patterns, even my emotions. I stopped answering unknown calls at midnight. My phone remained silent for long stretches, but sometimes, just as I drifted into sleep, a faint hiss would pierce the quiet. It wasn't constant, but enough to remind me that the experience hadn't fully ended. Some spaces retain the imprints of those who occupy them, and some memories are restless. Years later, I still feel the echo of Cypress Crest in the back of my mind. I avoid houses that are too quiet, studies that are too orderly, and landlines that ring in the dead of night. Sometimes, I catch myself pausing in front of a door, imagining the faint sway of curtains, imagining a whisper in my ear. I've learned to respect spaces not just for their aesthetic or architectural value, but for their memory, their residual energy. Houses are not neutral. They carry the weight of the past and, sometimes, the anticipation of those who once walked their floors. Curiosity can awaken that weight, and if you're not careful, it can follow you home. The moral is clear. Be cautious of spaces that seem too still, and never underestimate the silent imprint of presence. Even the seemingly harmless can hold shadows. And some voices, once awakened, do not easily sleep again. Curiosity without caution can awaken unseen presences. Spaces, like memories, hold echoes of those who entered them, and sometimes those echoes follow you long after you leave. I thought I was signing up for a quiet week of solitude. After a grueling stretch of work in Hobart, the idea of house-sitting Brackenhill farmhouse sounded like the perfect escape. Old creaking floors, sprawling rooms, and miles of eucalyptus trees swaying under the early spring wind. The owner, Mrs. Davenport, had been vague in her warnings. "The cellar is off limits. Rusted steps," she said, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel as if saying it once would imprint caution directly in my brain. I nodded, smiling politely, assuming it was more habit than genuine concern. The farmhouse sat like a forgotten relic at the bottom of a hill, its weathered exterior blending with the browning fields. A thin fog clung to the grass that morning, curling around the rusted wheelbarrow and the patchy vegetable beds. I parked, unloaded my small duffel, and let my fingers brush along the chipped wooden railing. The place smelled of dust and old pine, a scent that immediately brought back childhood memories of my grandparents' cabin in the mountains. At first, the silence was intoxicating. There were no cars, no neighbors, just the occasional thump of a branch against the roof. I wandered from room to room, discovering the peculiar charm of uneven floorboards, a fireplace that smelled faintly of soot, and the musty comfort of unused books stacked haphazardly on shelves. The house creaked as if stretching awake, its groans easily explained by temperature shifts, or so I told myself. By sunset, I had settled into a rhythm: light a fire in the living room, boil a pot of tea, and watch the shadows lengthen across the wooden floor. The wind picked up, whistling through cracks in the walls, and I started hearing soft thuds above the attic. I froze a few times, certain someone had entered, but the empty halls and lack of footprints in the dust reminded me of the solitude I craved. That first night, I walked past the cellar door, its half-rotted frame crooked like a stubborn tooth. The steps leading down were covered in dust and debris, and I remembered Mrs. Davenport's warning. "Rusted steps," I muttered, testing the handle, which resisted me with a stubborn click. Then I paused. From deep within the dark, I thought I heard something soft, deliberate, a sigh, or breath rising upward. I laughed nervously and chalked it up to imagination. Yet the sound lingered in my mind, like the echo of a word half-remembered. I slept lightly, the wind thrumming against the eaves, convinced it was nothing more than the house settling. But beneath that comfort, an uneasy thread was forming, tying me to the cellar in a way I didn't understand. The house wasn't just empty, it was listening. By the second night, the air had shifted. The wind had grown colder, carrying a metallic tang that made me wrinkle my nose. I had been tidying the garden when the dogs from the neighboring farm erupted in frantic barking. Their yaps were wild, panicked, and impossible to ignore. I froze, glancing toward the cellar door. It stood slightly ajar, as if inviting inspection, and, That breath I had thought I imagined the night before emerged again. It was slow, measured, human. I swear, I could feel the air vibrating in time with it. My heart thumped in my chest as I retrieved a flashlight, gripping it like a weapon. One step at a time, I approached, the beam slicing through shadows that seemed almost to recoil from it. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure crouched behind the furnace, pale skin reflecting the bay, light, hair tangled and wild, eyes wide and terrified. I stumbled backward. My voice caught somewhere between a shout and a whisper. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." I waved my hands, hoping to seem non-threatening. The man flinched, shivering violently. He looked like he had been living underground for months, maybe longer. I didn't mean," he muttered, voice trembling, eyes darting to every corner, as if he expected the walls themselves to close in. I backed up and slammed the cellar door, fumbling with the lock. My hands were slick with sweat, trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. Dialing emergency services felt surreal, like calling for help in a dream. Outside, the wind howled, and the dogs barked, continuously at nothing visible. I stayed by the window, flashlight in hand, watching the cellar door as if daring it to move. When the police arrived, they moved with a kind of calm disbelief. One officer whispered about a missing drifter, known to survive off scraps and potato fields, entering homes through weak points like broken coal chutes. My stomach knotted. I had not expected someone, or something, to be living beneath my feet. The officers pried the door open. The man flinched, then collapsed in exhaustion. I could see the grime on his hands, the hollow look in his eyes, and realized that the terror was mutual. He feared me as much as I feared him. The cellar had become a kind of cage, but he had made it a home. After the police took him away, I thought the ordeal was over. I tried to return to normal routines, lighting the fire, preparing meals, and listening to the wind through the eaves. But I noticed small things, faint scrapes along the attic beams, dust disturbed where no human should have walked, and the slight shift of floorboards above the living room. Curiosity overcame me. I explored the attic carefully, flashlight in hand, discovering narrow spaces lined with worn blankets and discarded tins. The man had been moving between cellar and attic with ease, unseen for weeks, surviving quietly while the house held its breath around him. I began to piece together his movements. He was clever, patient, and desperate. And in the silence of Bracken Hill, he had found a way to exist without confrontation. It was unsettling to realize that I had shared the house with a presence I had never suspected, watching, hiding, and breathing in the shadows. I confronted Mrs. Davenport when she returned. She admitted, reluctantly, that the farmhouse had a history: old coal chutes, forgotten cellars, and attic crawl spaces where the desperate or lost could hide. "I never thought someone would actually take advantage," she said, her voice tight with regret. "Most people don't stay long enough to find them." It made me reconsider what solitude truly meant. The house wasn't just empty. It was layered, with histories of those who had hidden within it, adapting to its rhythms without disturbing its fragile silence. Even after leaving Tasmania, the experience followed me. On quiet nights, I swear I hear faint scrapes above my ceiling, a reminder that spaces can harbor life unseen. I've walked through old cabins and farmhouses since, feeling the weight of hidden presences, imagining narrow spaces where the forgotten might survive. I started keeping a journal of sounds, shadows, and gaps in floorboards whenever I traveled. Sometimes it was paranoia, sometimes it was precaution, but I knew the line between them had blurred. The memory of the man crouched behind the furnace stayed vivid, his fear mirrored my own, a living echo of the house itself. My friends dismissed the story as exaggeration, a classic country isolation tale. But the image of him crouching in the dim light, shivering, eyes wide with silent terror, refused to fade. It had changed the way I perceive spaces, silence, and the thin line between safety and intrusion. The cellar that breathed taught me something fundamental. Fear is not always about immediate danger, and solitude is never absolute. Houses, like people, contain hidden stories, layers of survival, adaptation, and unseen lives, I learned to respect not just the warning signs, but the unseen consequences of curiosity, patience, and human need. Brackenhill Farmhouse remained beautiful, silent, and deceptive, but I left with a sense of cautious wisdom, to acknowledge what is hidden, to listen before judging, and to recognize that, even in isolation, life finds a way to persist. Understanding and empathy matter as much as courage. Fear often masks the struggles of others, and wisdom comes from recognizing the lives that exist just beyond our perception. Sometimes, the most important stories are the ones hiding quietly, waiting to be seen.